The young man seemed startled, then resigned. "You are right. You have forged a water bond between us. I am called Turok. Now we must go." "Water bond?" Kynes suppressed his questions and trailed after his companion. In his well-worn still suit, Turok scrambled over the rocks toward the vertical cliff. Kynes trudged beside fallen boulders, slipping on loose footing. Only as they approached did the planetologist notice a discontinuity in the strata, a seam that split the old, uplifted rock, forming a fissure camouflaged by dust and muted colors. The freeman slipped inside, penetrating the shadows with the speed of a desert lizard. Curious and anxious not to become lost, Kynes followed, moving quickly. He hoped he would get a chance to meet more of the freemen and learn about them. He didn't waste time considering that Turok might be leading him into a trap. What would be the point? The young man could easily have killed him out in the open. Turok stopped in the cool shade, giving Kynes a moment to catch up. He pointed toward specific places on the wall near him. There, and there. Without waiting to see if his charge understood, the youth stepped in each indicated spot, near invisible handholds and footholds. The young man slithered up the cliff, and Kynes did his best to climb after. Turok seemed to be playing a game with him, testing him somehow. But the planetologist surprised him. He was no water-fat bureaucrat, no mere bumbler into places where he didn't belong. As a wanderer on some of the harshest worlds the Imperium had to offer, he was in good shape. Kynes kept pace with the youth, climbing up behind him, using the tips of his fingers to haul his body higher. Moments after the freeman boy stopped and squatted on a narrow ledge, Kynes sat beside him, trying not to pant. "Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth," Turok said. "Your filters are more efficient that way." He nodded in faint admiration. "I think you might make it all the way to the Sietch." "What's a Sietch?" Kynes asked. He vaguely recognized the ancient Jacobsa language, but had not studied archaeology or phonetics. He had always found it irrelevant to his scientific study. "A secret place to retreat in safety. It's where my people live." "You mean it's your home?" "The desert is our home." "I'm eager to talk with your people," Kynes said, then continued, unable to contain his enthusiasm. "I've formed some opinions of this world and have developed a plan that might interest you, that might interest all the inhabitants of Arrakis." "Dune," the freeman youth said. "Only the Imperials and the Harkonnens call this place Arrakis." "All right," Kynes said. "Dune, then." Deep in the rocks ahead of them waited a grizzled old freeman with only one eye, his useless left socket covered by a puckered prune of leathered eyelid. Naib of Redwall Sietch, Heinar had also lost 2 fingers in a crysknife duel in his younger days, but he had survived, and his opponents had not. Heinar had proved to be a stern but competent leader of his people. Over the years his Sietch had prospered. The population had not decreased, and their hidden stockpiles of water grew with every cycle of the moons. In the infirmary cave, 2 old women tended foolish Stilgar, the injured youth who had been brought in by ground car only moments ago. The old women checked the medical dressing that had been applied by the outsider, and augmented it with some of their own medicinals. The crones conferred with each other, then both nodded at the Sietch leader. "Stilgar will live, Heinar," one old woman said. "This would have been a mortal wound had it not been tended immediately. The stranger saved him." "The stranger saved a careless fool," the Naib said, looking down at the young man on the cot. For weeks, troublesome reports of a curious outsider had reached Hainar's ears. Now the man, Pardot Kynes, was being led to the Sietch by a different route, through rock passageways. The stranger's actions were mind-boggling. An imperial servant who killed Harkonnens? Amun, the Freeman youth who had brought bleeding Stilgar back to the Sietch, waited anxiously beside his injured friend in the cave shadows. Hainer turned his monocular gaze to the young man, letting the women continue to tend their patient. "Why is it that Chorak brings an outsider to our Sietch?" "What were we to do, Hainer?" Amun looked surprised. "I needed his vehicle to bring Stilgar here." "You could have taken this man's ground car and all his possessions and given his water to the tribe," the Naib said, his voice low. "We can still do that," one of the women rasped, "as soon as Chorak gets here with him." "But the stranger fought and killed Harkonnens. We 3 would have died had he not arrived when he did," Amun insisted. "Is it not said that the enemy of my enemy is my friend?" "I do not trust or even understand the loyalties of this one," Hainer said, crossing his sinewy arms over his chest. "We know who he is, of course. The stranger comes from the Imperium. A planetologist, they say. He remains on Dune because the Harkonnens are forced to let him do his work. But this man Kynes answers only to the Emperor himself. If that. There are unanswered questions about him." Wearily, Hainer sat down on a stone bench carved in the side of the wall. A colorful tapestry of spun spice fibers hung across the cave opening, offering a limited sort of privacy. Sietch inhabitants learned early that privacy was in the mind, not in the environment. "I will speak with this Kynes and learn what he wants of us. Why he has defended 3 stupid and careless youths against an enemy he had no cause to make. Then I will take this matter to the Council of Elders and let them decide. We must make the choice that is best for the Sietch." Amun swallowed hard, recalling how valiantly the man Kynes had fought against the ruthless soldiers. But his fingers strayed to the pouch in his pocket, counting the water rings there, metal markers that tallied the accumulated wealth he had in the tribe. If the elders did decide to kill the planetologist after all, then he, Chorak, and Stilgar would divide the water treasure equally among them, along with the bounty from the 6 slain Harkonnens. When Chorak finally led him through the guarded openings, past a door seal, and into the Sietch proper, Kynes saw the place as a cave of infinite wonders. The aromas were dense, rich, and redolent with humanity, smells of life, of a confined population, of manufacturing, cooking, carefully concealed wastes, and even chemically exploited death. In a detached way, he confirmed his suspicion that the Freeman youths had not stolen the Harkonnen corpses for some sort of superstitious mutilation, but for the water in their bodies. Otherwise it would have gone to waste. Kynes had assumed that when he finally found a hidden Freeman settlement, it would be primitive, almost shameful in its lack of amenities. But here, in this walled-off grotto with side caves and lava tubes, and tunnels extending like a warren throughout the mountain, Kynes saw that the desert people lived in an austere yet comfortable style. Quarters rivaled anything Harkonnen functionaries enjoyed in the city of Carthage, and they were much more natural. As Kynes followed his young guide, he found his attention riveted on one fascinating sight after another. Luxurious woven carpets covered portions of the floor. Side rooms were strewn with cushions and low tables made of metal and polished stone. Articles of precious off-planet wood were few and seemingly ancient. A carved sandworm and a board game that he couldn't identify, its ornate pieces made of ivory or bone. Ancient machinery recirculated the Sietch air, letting no breath of moisture escape. He smelled the sharp cinnamon sweetness of raw spice everywhere, like incense, barely masking the sour pungency of unwashed bodies packed into close quarters. He heard women talking, children's voices, and a baby crying, all with a hushed restraint. The freemen spoke among themselves, eyeing this stranger with suspicion as he passed, led by Turok. Some of the older ones flashed him wicked smiles that gave the planetologist some concern. Their skin looked tough and leathery, leached of all excess water. Every pair of eyes was a deep blue within blue. Finally, Turok raised a hand, palm outward, signaling Kynes to halt inside a large meeting hall, a natural vault within the mountain. The grotto had ample floor space for hundreds and hundreds to stand. Additional benches and balconies zigzagged up the sheer reddish walls. How many people live in this Sietch? Kynes stared upward in the empty, echoing room to a high balcony, a speaking platform of some sort. After a moment, a proud old man stepped forward up there to look disdainfully down at the intruder. Kynes noted that the man had only one eye, and that he carried himself with the presence of a leader. "This is Einar," Turok whispered in his ear, "the Naib of Redwall Sietch." Raising a hand in greeting, Kynes called out, "I am pleased to meet the leader of this wondrous freeman city." "What is it you want from us, imperial man?" Einar called down in a tone that was ruthless and demanding. His words rang like cold steel against the stone. Kynes drew a deep breath. He had been waiting for an opportunity such as this for many days. Why waste time? The longer that dreams remained mere dreams, the more difficult it was to mold them into reality. "My name is Pardot Kynes, planetologist to the Emperor. I have a vision, sir, a dream for you and your people, one I wish to share with all the freemen, if only you will listen to me." "Better to listen to the wind through a creosote bush than to waste time with the words of a fool," the Sietch leader responded. His words had a ponderous weight, as if this were an old and recognizable saying among his people. Kynes stared back at the old man and quickly made up his own platitude, hoping to make an impression. "And if one refuses to listen to words of truth and hope, who then is the greater fool?" Young Turok gasped. From side passages, freeman onlookers stared wide-eyed at Kynes, amazed by this stranger who spoke so boldly to their Naib. Einar's face became dark and stormy. He felt a sullenness permeate him, and he envisioned this upstart planetologist lying slain on the cave floor. He put his hand on the hilt of a crysknife at his waist. "Do you challenge my leadership?" Making up his mind, the Naib yanked the curve-bladed knife from its sheath and glowered down at Kynes. Kynes didn't flinch. "No, sir, I challenge your imagination. Are you brave enough to meet the task, or are you too frightened to listen to what I have to say?" The Sietch leader stood tense, holding his strange milky blade high as he stared down at the prisoner. Kynes simply smiled up at him, his expression open. "It's difficult to talk to you way up there, sir." Finally, Einar chuckled, looked down at the bare blade in his hand. "A crysknife, once drawn, must never be sheathed without tasting blood." Then he quickly slashed its edge across his forearm, drawing a thin red line that coagulated within seconds. Kynes's eyes glittered with excitement, reflecting the light cast by the clusters of glow globes that floated in the large meeting chamber. "Very well, planetologist. You may talk until the breath flows out of your lungs. With your fate undecided, you will remain here in the Sietch until the Council of Elders deliberates over what must be done with you. But you'll listen to me first." Kynes nodded with utter confidence. Einar turned, took a step away from the high balcony, and spoke again over his shoulder. "You are a strange man, Pardot Kynes. An imperial servant and a guest of Harkonnen's. By definition, you are our enemy. But you have killed Harkonnens as well. What a quandary you present for us." The Sietch leader made quick gestures and barked commands, ordering a small but comfortable room to be prepared for the tall and curious planetologist, who would be their prisoner as well as their guest. And Einar thought, as he strode away, any man who would speak words of hope to the freemen after our many generations of suffering and wandering is either confused or a very brave man indeed. My father had only one real friend, I think. That was Count Hasimir Fenring, the genetic eunuch, and one of the deadliest fighters in the Imperium. From In My Father's House, by the Princess Irulan. Even from the highest darkened chamber of the Imperial Observatory, the pastel glow of the opulence-choked capital drowned out the stars over Kytane. Built centuries earlier by the enlightened Padishah Emperor Hasik Corino III, the observatory had been used little by his recent heirs, at least not for its intended purpose of studying the mysteries of the universe. Crown Prince Shaddam paced across the cold, burnished metal floor as Fenring fiddled with the controls of a high-powered starscope. The genetic eunuch hummed to himself, making unpleasant, insipid sounds. "Would you please stop those noises?" Shaddam said. "Just focus the damned lenses." Fenring continued to hum, only fractionally quieter now. "The oils must be in precise balance. You would rather have the starscope perfect than fast." Shaddam huffed. "You didn't ask my preference." "I decided for you." He stood back from the starscope's calibrated phased optics and bowed with an annoyingly formal gesture. "My Lord Prince, I present to you an image from orbit. See it with your own eyes." Shaddam squinted into the eyepiece pickups until a shape became startlingly clear, soaring silently in the distance. The image shifted between brittle resolution and murky ripples caused by atmospheric distortion. The mammoth highliner was the size of an asteroid, hanging over Kytane and waiting to be met by a flotilla of small ships from the surface. A tiny movement caught his eye, and Shaddam spotted the yellow-white flickers of engines as frigates rose from Kytane bearing diplomats and emissaries, followed by transports carrying artifacts and cargo from the imperial capital world. The frigates themselves were immense, flanked by cadres of smaller ships, but the curve of the highliner's hull dwarfed everything. At the same time, other ships departed from the highliner hold and descended toward the capital city. "Delegation parties," Shaddam said. "They've brought tributes to my father." "Taxes, actually, not tributes," Fenring pointed out. "Same thing in an old-fashioned sense, of course. Elrood is still their emperor. The Crown Prince scowled at him. "But for how much longer? Is your damned Chaumerki going to take decades?" Shaddam fought to keep his voice low, although subsonic white noise generators supposedly distorted their speech to foil any listening devices. "Couldn't you find a different poison? A faster one? This waiting is maddening. How much time has passed anyway? It seems like a year since I've slept well." "You mean we should have been more overt about the murder? Not advisable." Fenring took his station back at the starscope, adjusting the automated trackers to follow the highliner along its orbit. "Be patient, my Lord Prince. Until I suggested this plan, you were content to wait for decades. What does a year or two matter compared with the length of your eventual reign?" Shaddam nudged Fenring away from the eyepieces so he wouldn't have to look at his fellow conspirator. "Now that we've finally set the wheels in motion, I'm impatient for my father to die. Don't give me time to brood about it and regret my decision. I'll suffocate until I can ascend the Golden Lion throne. I was destined to lead Hasimir, but some have been whispering that I'll never get the opportunity. It makes me afraid to marry and father any children." If he expected Fenring to attempt to convince him otherwise, the other man disappointed him with his silence. Fenring spoke again after a few moments. "Ki is slow poison by design. We have worked long and hard to establish our plan, and your impatience can only cause damage and increase risk. A more sudden act would certainly create suspicion in the Landsraad. They would seize upon any wedge, any scandal, to weaken your position." "But I am the heir to House Corino," Shaddam said, lowering his voice to a throaty whisper. "How can they question my right?" "And you come to the imperial throne bearing all the associated baggage, all the obligations, past antagonisms, and prejudices. Don't fool yourself, my friend. The Emperor is merely one sizable force among many that make up the delicate fabric of our Imperium. If all the houses banded together against us, even your father's mighty Sardaukar legions might not be able to hold out. No one dares risk it. When I'm on the throne, I intend to strengthen the emperorship, add some real teeth to the title." Shaddam stood away from the starscope. Fenring shook his head with exaggerated sadness. "I'd be willing to wager a cargo hold full of the highest quality whale fur that most of your predecessors have vowed the same thing to their advisers ever since the Great Revolt." He drew a deep breath, narrowing his large dark eyes. "Even if the Yin-Ki works as planned, you have at least another year to wait. So calm yourself. Take comfort in the increased symptoms of aging we've seen in your father. Encourage him to drink more spice beer." Miffed, Shaddam turned back to the phased optics and studied the hull patterns along the belly of the highliner, the mark of Ixian construction yards, the cartouche of the Spacing Guild. The hold was crowded with fleets of frigates from various houses, shipments assigned to Choam, and precious records earmarked for library archives on Wallach 9. "By the way, someone of interest is aboard that highliner," Fenring said. "Oh?" Fenring crossed his arms over his narrow chest. "A person who appears to be a simple seller of pundi rice and chikarba root on his way to a Tleilaxu way station. He's bearing your message for the Tleilaxu masters, your proposal to meet with them and discuss covert imperial funding of a large-scale project that will produce a substitute for the spice melange." "My proposal? I made no such proposal." Revulsion flickered across Shaddam's face. You did, my Lord Prince. The possibility of using unorthodox Tleilaxu means to develop a synthetic spice. What a good idea you had. Show your father how smart you are." "Don't place the blame on me, Hasimir. It was your idea." "You don't want the credit?" "Not in the least." Fenring raised his eyebrows. "You are serious about breaking the Arrakis bottleneck and setting up the Imperial House with a private, unlimited source of melange, aren't you?" Shaddam glowered. "Of course I'm serious." "Then we will bring a Tleilaxu master here in secret to present his proposal to the Emperor. We'll soon see how far old Elrood is willing to go." Blindness can take many forms other than the inability to see. Fanatics are often blinded in their thoughts. Leaders are often blinded in their hearts. The Orange Catholic Bible. For months, Leto had stayed in the underground city of Vernii as the honored guest of Ix. By now, he had become comfortable with the strangeness of his new surroundings, with the routine, and with self-confident Ixian security, comfortable enough to grow careless. Prince Rambur was a chronic late sleeper, while Leto was the opposite, an early riser like the fishermen on Caladan. The Atreides heir wandered the upper stalactite buildings alone, going to observation windows and peeking in on manufacturing design procedures or fabrication lines. He learned how to use the transit systems, and discovered that his bioscram card from Earl Vernius opened many doors for him. Leto gleaned more from his wanderings and his voracious curiosity than he did from instructional meetings hosted by various tutors. Remembering his father's admonishment to learn from everything, he took the self-guiding lift tubes. When none were available, he grew accustomed to using walkways, cargo lifts, or even ladders to go from one level to another. One morning, after awakening refreshed and restless, Leto went to one of the upper atriums and stepped out onto an observation balcony. Even sealed underground, the caverns of Ix were so vast that they had their own air currents and wind patterns, though it was a far cry from the castle towers and windy cliffsides of his home. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs to capacity, but the air here always smelled of rock dust. Maybe it was just his imagination. Stretching his arms, Leto looked out and down toward the broad grotto that had held the guild highliner. Among the scars of construction and support machinery, he could pick out the already sprouting skeleton of another massive hull, flash-welded together by teams of suboid workers. He watched the low-level inhabitants working with insect efficiency. A cargo platform drifted by, passing directly below the balcony as it made a gradual descent to the distant work area. Leto leaned over the railing and saw that the platform's surface was loaded with raw materials mined from the crust of the planet. On impulse, he climbed over the balcony rim, took a deep breath, and dropped 2 meters to land atop a pile of girders and plating, destined for the highliner construction site. He assumed he could find a way to get back up to the stalactite buildings using his bioscram card and his understanding of the city workings. A pilot underneath the hovering platform guided the lowering load. He didn't seem to notice or care about his unexpected passenger. Cool breezes riffled through Leto's hair as he descended toward the warmer surface. Thinking of ocean winds, he sucked in another deep breath. Here, beneath the immense vault of the ceiling, he felt a freedom that reminded him of the seashore. With the thought came a pang of homesickness for the ocean breezes of Caladan, the noises of the village market, the booming laugh of his father, even the prim concern of his mother. He and Rambur spent too much time confined within the buildings of Ix, and Leto often longed for fresh air and a cold wind on his face. Perhaps he would ask Rambur to accompany him up to the surface again. There the two of them could wander around the wilderness and look up at the infinite sky, and Leto could stretch his muscles and feel real sunlight on his face, instead of the holographic illumination displayed on the cavern ceiling. While the Ixian prince was not Leto's equal as a fighter, neither was he the spoiled son so common among many great houses. He had his interests and loved collecting rocks and minerals. Rambur had an easy, generous way about him, and an unflagging optimism, but that was not to be misinterpreted. Beneath the soft shell was a fierce determination and a desire to excel in every pursuit. In the gigantic manufacturing grotto, supports and suspensor jacks had been readied for the new highliner already taking shape. Equipment and machinery stood waiting near where hollow blueprints shimmered in the air. Even with full resources and huge numbers of suboid workers, such a vessel required the better part of a standard year to construct. The cost of a highliner was equivalent to the economic output of many solar systems. Thus only Choam and the Guild could finance such massive projects, while House Vernius, as the manufacturer, reaped incredible profits. The docile working class on Ix far outnumbered the administrators and the nobles. On the floor of the grotto, low archways and huts built into the solid rock provided entrances to a warren of living quarters. Leto had never visited the suboids himself, but Romber had assured him that the lower classes were well taken care of. Leto knew these crews labored around the clock to build each new ship. The suboids certainly worked hard for House Vernius. The cargo platform levitated downward to the rocky cavern floor, and teams of workers came forward to unload the heavy raw materials. Leto sprang down, landed on his hands and feet, then stood and brushed himself off. The strangely placid suboids had pale skin dusted with freckles. They looked at him with doe eyes, and didn't ask any questions or object to his presence. They simply averted their gazes and went about their tasks. The way Kylea and Romber talked about them, Leto had imagined the suboids to be less than human, muscular troglodytes without minds, who simply labored and sweated. But the people around him could easily have passed for normals. Perhaps they weren't brilliant scientists or diplomats, but the working class didn't appear to be animals either. With his gray eyes open wide, Leto walked along the grotto floor, staying out of the way as he observed the highliner construction. Leto admired the sheer engineering and management of such an incredible job. In the heavier, dustier air on the ground, he smelled an acrid tang of laser welding and alloy-fusing materials. The suboids followed a master plan, using step-by-step instructions like a hive organism. They concluded each increment of the huge task without being overwhelmed by the amount of work still in store for them. The suboids did not chatter, sing, or roughhouse. Behavior Leto had seen among the fishermen, farmers, and factory workers of Caladan. These pale-skinned laborers remained intent only on their tasks. He thought he imagined well-hidden resentment, a simmering anger beneath calm, pale faces. But he didn't feel afraid down here alone. Duke Paulus had always encouraged Leto to play with villager children, to go out on fishing boats, to mix with merchants and weavers in the marketplace. He had even spent a month working in the Pundi rice fields. In order to understand how to rule a people, the old duke had said, you must first understand the people themselves. His mother had frowned upon such activities, of course, insisting that the son of a duke should not dirty his hands with the mud of rice paddies, or foul his clothes with the slime of a sea-catch. What good does it do for our son to know how to skin and gut a fish? He will be the ruler of a great house. But Paulus Atreides had his own way of insisting, and he made it clear that his wishes were law. And Leto had to admit that despite sore muscles, an aching back, and sunburned skin, those times of hard work had satisfied him in a way that grand banquets or receptions hosted in Castle Caladan could not. As a result, he thought he understood the common folk, how they felt, how hard they worked. Leto appreciated them for it, rather than scorning them. The old duke had been proud of his son for comprehending that fundamental point. Now, as he walked among the suboids, Leto tried to understand them in the same way. Powerful glow globes hovered over the work site, driving back shadows, maintaining a starkness in the air. The grotto was large enough that the construction sounds did not echo back, but reflected and faded into the distance. He saw one of the openings into the lower tunnels, and since no one had yet questioned his business there, Leto decided this would be a good opportunity to learn more about the suboid culture. Maybe he could discover things even Romber didn't know about his own world. When a crew of workers emerged from the archway, clad in service overalls, Leto slipped inside. He wandered into the tunnels and spiraled down, passing hollowed-out living compartments, identical and evenly spaced rooms that reminded him of the chambers in an insect hive. Occasionally, though, he spotted homey touches. Colorful fabrics or tapestries, a few drawings, images painted on the stone walls. He smelled cooking, heard low conversations, but no music, and not much laughter. He thought of his days spent studying and relaxing in the inverted skyscrapers overhead, with their polished floors, serchrome and faceted crystal plas windows, the soft beds and comfortable clothes, the fine foods. On Caladan, ordinary citizens could petition the Duke whenever they wished. Leto remembered when he and his father would walk in the marketplaces, talking to the merchants and craftsmen, allowing themselves to be seen and known as real people rather than as faceless rulers. He didn't think Dominic Vernius even noticed the differences between himself and his comrade Paulus. The hearty, bald Earl gave all of his attention and enthusiasm to his family and the workers in his immediate vicinity, paying attention to overall industrial operations and business politics to keep the Ixian fortunes pouring in. But Dominic viewed the suboids as resources. Yes, he cared for them well enough, just as he maintained his precious machinery. But Leto wondered if Romber and his family treated the suboids as people. He'd already gone down many levels and felt the uncomfortable tightness of stale air. The tunnels ahead became darker and emptier. The quiet corridors led deeper into open rooms, common areas from which he heard voices, a rustling of bodies. He was about to turn back, knowing he had a full day ahead of him, studies and lectures about mechanical operations and industrial processes. Romber probably hadn't even eaten breakfast yet. Curious, Leto stopped at the archway to see many suboids gathered in a common room. There were no seats or benches that he could see, and so all the people remained standing. He listened to the droning, curiously impassioned words of one suboid, a short, muscular man at the front of the room. In the man's voice, and in the fire in his eyes, Leto detected emotions that he found peculiar, in view of what he had heard about the suboids, that they were placid and undemanding. "We build the highliners," he said, and his voice grew louder. "We manufacture the technological objects, yet we make none of the decisions. We do as we are commanded, even when we know those plans are wrong." The suboids began to mutter and mumble. "Some of the new technologies go beyond what is forbidden by the Great Revolt. We are creating thinking machines. We don't need to understand the blueprints and designs because we know what they will do." Hesitating, Leto drew back into the shadows of the archway. He had walked enough among the common people that he usually wasn't afraid of them. But something strange was going on here. He wanted to run, yet needed to listen. "Since we are suboids, we have no participation in profits from Ixian technology. We have simple lives and few ambitions. But we do have our religion. We read the Orange Catholic Bible and know in our hearts what is right." The suboid speaker raised a massive, knuckled fist. "And we know that many of the things we've been building here on Ix are not right." The audience moved restlessly again, on the verge of being riled. Romber had insisted that this group had no ambitions, did not have the capacity for them. Here, though, Leto saw otherwise. The suboid speaker narrowed his eyes and spoke ominously. "What are we going to do? Should we petition our masters and demand answers? Should we do more?" He swept his gaze over the gathered listeners. Then, suddenly, like two sharp flechettes, his eyes skewered Leto eavesdropping in the archway shadows. "Who are you?" Leto stumbled backward, raising his hands. "I'm sorry, I got lost. I didn't mean anything by it." Normally he would know how to make himself welcome, but now his confusion raised his senses to a fever pitch. The worker audience spun about, and their eyes slowly lit with comprehension. They realized the implications of what the speaker had said, and what Leto had overheard. "I'm really sorry," Leto said. "I meant no trespass." His heart pounded. Sweat sparkled on his brow, and he sensed extreme danger. Several suboids began to move toward him like automatons, picking up speed. Leto offered them his most congenial smile. "If you'd like, I can speak with Earl Vernius for you. Bring some of your grievances—" The suboids closed in, and Leto bolted and ran. He rushed back through the low corridors, turning at random, ducking down passageways as the workers hurried, ineffectually pursuing and growling in anger. They flooded out, spreading into side corridors in their search for him, and Leto could not remember the way back to the open cavern. The fact that he got lost probably saved him. The suboids continued to block his retreat, attempting to intercept him in corridors that led to the surface. But Leto didn't know where he was going and took blind turns, sometimes hiding in empty alcoves, until finally he reached a small maintenance door that spilled out into the dusty air under the glaring lights of industrial glow-globes. Several suboids, seeing his silhouette in the doorway, shouted from deep below. But Leto raced out to an emergency lift tube. He swept his bioscram card through the reader and gained access to the upper levels. Shaking in the aftermath of a burned-out adrenaline rush, Leto couldn't believe what he had just heard, and didn't know what the suboids would have done had they caught him. He had been astonished enough to see their outrage and their reactions. Intellectually, he couldn't believe they would have killed him. Not the son of Duke Atreides, an honored guest of House Vernius. He had offered to help them, after all. But the suboids clearly held a deep potential for violence, a frightening darkness that they had managed to hide from their oblivious rulers above. Leto wondered with dread if perhaps there might be other enclaves of dissent, other groups with similarly charismatic speakers who could manage to tap into the low-level dissatisfaction of the vast worker population. As he rode up in the lift chamber, Leto looked down and saw the workers below, innocently acting out their roles, carrying out their daily routines. He knew he had to report what he had overheard. But would anyone believe him? He realized with a tightness in his stomach that he was learning far more about Ix than he had ever meant to know. Hope can be the greatest weapon of a downtrodden people, or the greatest enemy of those who are about to fail. We must remain aware of its advantages and its limitations. Lady Helena Atreides, Her Personal Journals. After weeks of aimless journeying, the cargo ship dropped out of the orbiting highliner and sped down toward the cloud-swirled atmosphere of Caladan. For Duncan Idaho, the end of his long ordeal seemed at hand. From his stowaway spot in the cluttered cargo bay, Duncan shifted a heavy box. Its metal corners grated across the deck plates, but he finally got the burden out of the way so he could remove the cover flange on a small window port. Leaning close to the protective plaz, Duncan stared down at the ocean-rich world. Finally, he began to believe. Caladan, my new home. Even from high orbit, Giedi Prime had looked dark and forbidding, like an infected sore. Even from high orbit, Giedi Prime had looked dark and forbidding, like an infected sore. But Caladan, home of the legendary Duke Atreides, mortal enemy of the Harkonnens, seemed like a sapphire sparkling with a blaze of sunlight. After everything that had happened to him, it still seemed impossible that the surly and treacherous woman, Janice Milam, had actually been true to her word. She had rescued him for her own petty reasons, her own spiteful revenge. But that did not matter to Duncan. He was here. It had been worse than a nightmare, which he relived in the brooding days as the Highliner journeyed from system to system in a roundabout way to Caladan. In the darkness of Forest Guard Station, as he had approached the mysterious Flitterthopter, the woman had snatched Duncan, gripping tightly before he could defend himself. The young boy had reacted with fear and frantic struggles, but Janice yanked his arm, breaking open the hardened new skin he'd placed over the deep cut in his shoulder. With surprising strength, the dusky-skinned woman hauled him inside the small flitter and sealed the entry hatch. Yowling like a wild animal, Duncan thrashed and clawed, trying to writhe away from her grip. He pounded on the curved hatch, desperate to get out, to run once again into the night filled with armed hunters. But instead the flitter's door remained locked. Panting, Janice released the boy, tossed her chocolate hair, and glared at him. "If you don't stop it right now, Idaho, I'm going to dump you in the laps of those Harkonnen hunters." Turning away from him with disdain, she powered up the flitter's engines. Duncan could feel an ominous hum travel through the small craft, vibrating through the seat and floor. He crouched back against the wall. "You've already betrayed me to the Harkonnens. You were the one who made those men take my parents and murder them. You're the reason I had to train so hard and why they're hunting me now. I know what you did." "Yeah, well, things have changed." She raised a dusky hand in a meaningless gesture, turning toward the piloting controls. "I'm not helping Harkonnens anymore, not after what they did to me." Indignant, Duncan clenched his fists at his sides. Blood from the reopened wound seeped onto his tattered shirt. "What they did to you?" He couldn't imagine anything that even approached the anguish he and his family had endured. "You wouldn't understand. You're just a youngster. Another one of their pawns." Janice smiled as she raised the flitter up off the ground. "But through you I can get back at them." Duncan sneered. "Maybe I'm just a boy, but I spent all night beating the Harkonnens at their hunting game. I watched Rabban kill my mother and father. Who knows what else they've done to my uncles, aunts, and cousins? I doubt there's anyone left alive on Giedi Prime with the name of Idaho, especially after the embarrassment you caused them tonight. Tough luck." "If they did that, it was a waste of effort," he said, trying to hide the pain. "I didn't know my relatives anyway." Janice increased the flitter's speed, boosting them low across the dark trees and away from the wilderness preserve. "Right now I'm helping you get away from the hunters, so just shut up and be glad. You don't have any other options." She ran the craft without lights, keeping her engines masked, though Duncan couldn't imagine how they could ever escape from prying Harkonnen eyes. He had killed several of the hunters, and worse, he had outwitted and humiliated Rabban. Duncan allowed himself the slightest satisfied smile. Coming forward, he slumped exhausted into a seat beside Janice, who had strapped herself into the pilot's chair. "Why should I trust you?" Did I ask you to trust me?" She flashed a dark-eyed glance at him. "Just take advantage of the situation." "Are you going to tell me anything?" Janice flew in silence for a long moment, racing over the bunched treetops before she answered. "It's true. Yeah, I reported your parents to the Harkonnens. I'd heard rumors. Knew your mother and father had done something to get the officials angry. And the Harkonnens don't like people who make them angry. I was looking out for myself and saw an advantage. By turning them in, I thought I might get a reward. Besides, your parents caused the problem themselves in the first place. They made the mistakes. I was just trying to cash in on it. Nothing personal. Somebody else would have done it if I hadn't." Duncan scowled, clenching his grimy hands. He wished he had the nerve to use his knife on this woman, but that would cause the flitter to crash. She was his only way out. For now. Her face contorted into an angry grimace. "But what did the Harkonnens give me in return? A reward? A promotion? No, nothing. A kick in the teeth. Not even a thank you very much." A troubled look crossed her face, disappearing as quickly as a tiny cloud scudding across the sun. "It's not easy to do something like that, you know. You think I enjoyed it? But on Gidi Prime opportunities arise rarely enough, and I'd watched too many of them pass me by. This should have really changed things for me. But when I approached them to ask for the slightest bit of consideration, they threw me out and ordered me not to come back again. It was all for nothing, and that makes it even worse." Her nostrils flared. "Nobody does that to Janice Milam without risking plenty." "So you're not doing this for me at all," Duncan said. "Not because you feel guilty about what you did and all the pain you caused people. You just want to get even with the Harkonnens. Hey, kid, just take your breaks where you can get them." Duncan rummaged in one of the storage compartments until he found 2 fruit rice bars and a sealed bubble of juice. Without asking, he tore into the packets and began stuffing himself. The bars tasted only faintly of cinnamon, a flavor enhancer to simulate melange. "You're welcome," Janice said sarcastically. He didn't reply, chewed loudly. All night long the flitter soared over the lowlands toward the forbidding city of Barony. For a moment Duncan thought she intended to dump him back into prison, where he would have to go through everything all over again. He slipped his hand into his pocket, felt the handle of his dull knife. But Janice flew the unmarked craft beyond the prison complex and headed south, past a dozen cities and villages. They had stopped for a day, hiding out during the afternoon, replenishing their supplies at a small way station. Janice provided him with a blue single suit, cleaned up his wound as best she could, and crudely administered medical treatment. She tended him with no special care, but merely expressed the hope that he would not draw attention to himself. At dusk they set off again, heading far south to an independent spaceport. Duncan didn't know the names of the places they visited, nor did he ask. No one had ever taught him geography. Whenever he bothered to venture a question, Janice invariably snapped at him or ignored him entirely. The spaceport complex carried a flavor of rough mercantile personnel and the guild, rather than the cumbersome Harkonnen style. It was functional and efficient, with endurance emphasized over luxury or eye appeal. Corridors and rooms were large enough for the movement of enclosed tanks holding guild navigators. Janice parked the flitterthopter where she could easily retrieve it, then set her own hot-wired security systems before leaving the craft behind. "Follow me," she said. With young Duncan in tow, she marched out into the bustle and chaos of the spaceport. "I've made some arrangements. But if you get lost here, I'm not looking for you." "Why shouldn't I just run? I don't trust you." "I'm going to put you on a ship that'll take you away from Gidi Prime, far from the Harkonnens." She looked down at him, goading. "Your choice, kid. I don't need any more trouble from you." Duncan clenched his teeth and followed her without further comment. Janice tracked down a battered cargo craft swarming with workers who loaded scuffed cases on board. Using suspensor pads, they dragged heavy pallets into the holding bay and stacked them haphazardly. "Second mate of this ship is an old friend of mine," Janice said. "He owes me a favor." Duncan did not ask what kind of people a woman like Janice Milam would consider friends, or what she had done to earn herself such a favor. "I'm not going to pay a single salary for your passage, Idaho. Your family has already cost my conscience enough, ruined my standing with the Harkonnen overlords, and got me nothing. But my friend Reno says you can ride in the hold, just as long as you don't eat anything other than standard rations or cost anyone time or credits." Duncan watched the spaceport activities around him. He had no real conception of what life would be like on any other world. The cargo ship looked old and unimpressive, but if it provided him with passage away from Gidi Prime, then it was a golden bird from heaven. Janice took him roughly by his arm and marched him toward the loading ramp. His sore shoulder throbbed. "They're hauling recyclable materials and other salvage, which they'll take to a processing station on Caladan. That's the home of House Atreides, arch enemies of the Harkonnens. You know about the feud between those houses?" When Duncan shook his head, Janice laughed. "Of course not. How would a little dirt rodent like you have learned anything about the Landsrat and the great houses?" She stopped one of the workers guiding a precariously loaded suspensor platform. "Where's Reno? Tell him Janice Milam is here, and I want to see him right away." She glanced down at Duncan, who stood up straight and tried to look presentable. "Tell him I brought the package I promised." Touching a communicator on his lapel, the man mumbled something into it. Then, without acknowledging Janice, he pushed his load up into the squat cargo hauler. Duncan waited, analyzing the activity around him, while Janice frowned and fidgeted. Before long, a grubby-looking man emerged, his skin smeared with colored lubricants, grime, and oily sweat. "Reno!" Janice waved to him. "It's about damn time." He gave her a tight embrace, followed by a long and wet kiss. Janice broke away as quickly as she could and pointed to Duncan. "There he is. Take him to Caladan." She smiled. "I can't think of a better revenge than to deliver this boy right where they least want him to be, and where they're least likely to find him." "You play dangerous games, Janice," Reno said. "I enjoy games." She balled her fist and playfully punched him in the shoulder. "Don't tell anyone." Reno raised his eyebrows. "What's the point of coming back to this scummy port if you're not here waiting for me? Who'd keep me company in a dark and lonely bunk? No, it wouldn't be worth my while to turn you in. But you still owe me." Before going, Janice knelt and fixed her eyes on young Duncan Idaho. She seemed to be trying for some semblance of compassion. "Look, kid, here's what I want you to do. When you get to Caladan, step off that ship and insist on seeing Duke Paulus Atreides himself. Duke Atreides. Tell him you've come from the Harkonnens and demand to be taken into service in his household." Reno's eyebrows shot high on his forehead, and he muttered something unintelligible. Janice kept her face firm and intent, thinking to play a last cruel joke on the boy she had betrayed. She realized there would be no chance whatsoever that a dirty, nameless street urchin could possibly set foot in the grand hall of Castle Caladan. but that wouldn't stop him from trying. Maybe for years. She'd already had her victory by stealing the boy from Ravan's hunting party. She had known they were taking Duncan to the forest guard station, and so she made a particular effort to find him, to snatch him away and turn him over to the Harkonnens' greatest enemies. Whatever else happened to the boy was now irrelevant to her, but Janice amused herself by imagining all the tribulations Duncan Idaho would undergo before finally giving up. "Come on," Reno said gruffly, pulling Duncan's arm. "I'll find you a place in the cargo hold where you can sleep and hide." Duncan didn't look back at Janice. He wondered if she expected him to say goodbye or thank her for what she'd done, but he refused to do that. She hadn't helped him because she cared, or even out of remorse. No, he wouldn't demean himself, and he could never forgive Janice for her part in destroying his family. Strange woman. He walked up the ramp, looking straight ahead, not knowing where he was going. Lost and parentless, without any idea of what he would do next, Duncan Idaho headed off. Reno gave him no comfort and little nourishment, but at least he left the boy in peace. What Duncan Idaho needed most in the entire universe was time to recover, a few days to sort out his memories and learn to live with the ones he could not forget. He slept alone like a rat in the cargo hold of the battered transport, surrounded by scrap metal and recyclables. None of it was soft, but he still slept well enough on the rust-smelling floor, with his back against a cold bulkhead. It was the most peaceful time he'd had in recent memory. Finally, when the ship descended toward Caladan to deliver its load and dump him alone and friendless on a strange world, Duncan was ready for anything. He had his drive and his energy. Nothing would sway him from his chosen quest. Now he just had to find Duke Paulus Atreides. History allows us to see the obvious, but, unfortunately, not until it is too late. Prince Raphael Corrino. When he surveyed Leto's bedraggled black hair, his dust-smeared clothes, and the perspiration streaks down his cheeks, Romber actually chuckled. He meant no insult by his response, but seemed incapable of believing the preposterous story Leto had told. He stood back and assessed his friend. "Vermilion hells! Don't you think you're, overreacting a bit, Leto?" Romber strode over to one of the broad windows. Alcoves all along the wall of the stocky prince's room displayed hand-picked geological oddities, his delight and pride. Far beyond the amenities of his station as the Earl's son, Romber found joy in his collection of minerals, crystals, and gems. He could have purchased more magnificent specimens many times over, but the prince had personally found each rock in his own explorations of cave floors and small tunnels. But in all his explorations, Romber, indeed the entire Vernius ruling family, had been blind to the unrest among the workers. Now Leto understood why the old duke had insisted that his son learn to read his subjects and know the mood of the populace. "At the heart of it all, lad, we rule at their sufferance," Paulus had told him, though, thankfully, most of the population doesn't realize it. If you're a good enough ruler, none of your people will think to question it. As if embarrassed by Leto's dramatic news and rumpled appearance, the tousle-haired young man peered down at the swirling masses of workers in the production yards below. Everything seemed quiet. Business as usual. "Leto, Leto!" He pointed a pudgy finger at the apparently content lower classes who labored like dutiful drones. "Subboids can't even decide for themselves what to eat for dinner, much less band together and start a rebellion. That takes too much initiative." Leto shook his head, still panting. His sweaty hair clung to his forehead. He felt more shaky now that he was safe, sitting slumped in a comfortable, self-forming chair in Romber's private quarters. When he'd been fleeing for his life, he had reacted on instinct alone. Now, trying to relax, he couldn't keep his pulse from racing. He took a long gulp of sour sidrit juice from a goblet on Romber's breakfast tray. "I'm only reporting what I saw, Romber, and I don't imagine threats. I've seen enough real ones to know the difference." He leaned forward, his gray eyes flashing at his friend. "I tell you, something's going on. The suboids were talking about overthrowing House Vernius, tearing down what you've built, and taking Ix for themselves. They were preparing for violence." Romber hesitated, as if still waiting to hear the punchline. "Well, I'll tell my father. You can give him your version of the events, and I'm sure he'll look into the matter." Leto's shoulders sagged. What if Earl Vernius ignored the problem until it was too late? Romber brushed down his purple tunic and smiled, then scratched his head in perplexity. It seemed to take great stamina for him to address the subject again. He appeared genuinely baffled. "But if you've been down there, Leto, you see that we take care of the suboids. They're given food, shelter, families, jobs. Sure, maybe we take the lion's share of the profits. That's the way of things. That's our society. But we don't abuse our workers. What can they possibly complain about?" "Maybe they see it differently," Leto said. "Physical oppression isn't the only kind of abuse." Romber brightened, then extended his hand. "Come, my friend. This might just make an interesting twist for our political lectures today. We can use it as a hypothetical case." Leto followed, more saddened than distraught. He was afraid the Ixians would never see this trouble as anything more than an interesting political discussion. From the tallest spire of the Grand Palais, Earl Dominic Vernius ruled an industrial empire hidden from outside view. The big man paced back and forth on the transparent floor of his orb office that hung like a magnificent crystal ball from the cavern ceiling. The office walls and floor were constructed of perfectly bonded Ixian glass, with no seams or distortions. He seemed to be walking on air, floating over his domain. At times Dominic felt like a deity on high, gazing out upon his universe. He ran a calloused palm across his smooth, newly shaven head. The skin still tingled there from the invigorating lotions Shando used when she massaged his scalp. His daughter, Kylea, sat in a suspensor chair and watched him. He approved of her taking an interest in Ixian business, but today he felt too troubled to spend much time debating with her. He brushed imaginary crumbs off his newly laundered sleeveless tunic, turned about, and circled his quicksilver desk again. Kylea continued to study him, offering no advice, though his daughter understood the problem they faced. Dominic didn't expect old Rudy to roll over and meekly accept the loss of tax revenues caused by the new Ixian highliner design. No, the Emperor would find some way to twist a simple business decision into a personal affront. But Dominic had no idea how the retaliation would come, or where it would strike. Elrood had always been unpredictable. "You just have to stay one step ahead of him," Kylea said. "You're good at that." She thought of the wily way her father had stolen the Emperor's concubine right out from under his nose, and how Elrood had never forgotten the fact. The slightest touch of resentment darkened her words. She would rather have grown up on marvelous Kytane instead of here, under the ground. "I can't stay ahead of him if I don't know which direction he's moving," Dominic replied. The Ixian Earl seemed to be floating upside down, with the solid rock ceiling and the spires of the Grand Palais above his head, and only open air beneath his feet. Kylia straightened the lace on her gown, adjusted the trim, and bent as she studied shipping records and compared manifests again, hoping to determine a better pattern for distributing Ixian technology. Dominic didn't expect her to do better than his experts, but he let her have her fun. Her idea to send out Ixian self-learning fighting mechs to a few black market dealers had been a stroke of genius. He paused a moment for a wistful smile that made his long mustache sink into the seams around his mouth. His daughter was stunningly beautiful, a work of art in every way, made to be an ornament in some great lord's household. But she was sharp-witted, too. Kylia was a strange mixture, all right, fascinated by court games and styles and everything to do with the grandeur of Kytane, but also doggedly determined to comprehend the workings of House Vernius. Even at her age, she understood that behind-the-scenes business complexities were a woman's real key to power in the Imperium, unless she joined the Bene Gesserit. Dominic didn't think his daughter understood Shando's decision to leave the Imperial court and come with him to Ix. Why would the lover of the most powerful man in the universe leave all that splendor to marry a weather-beaten war hero who lived in a city underground? At times Dominic wondered the same thing, but his love for Shando knew no bounds, and his wife often told him she had never regretted her decision. Kylia offered a stark contrast with her mother in all but appearance. The young woman couldn't possibly be comfortable in her extravagant clothes and finery, yet she wore her best at all times, as if afraid she might miss an opportunity. Perhaps she resented the lost chances in her life, and would rather be warded off to a sponsor in the Imperial Palace. He'd noticed that she toyed with the affections of the twin sons of Ambassador Pilru, as if marriage to one of them might tie her to the embassy on Kytane. But Kater and Demur Pilru were scheduled to test for positions in the Spacing Guild, and if they passed the examination, they would be off-planet within a week. At any rate, Dominic was sure he could arrange a much more profitable match for his only female child. Perhaps even to Leto Atreides. A Kamai blinked yellow on the wall, interrupting his thoughts. An important message, an update of the troubling rumors that had spread like poison through a cistern. "Yes?" he said. Without being asked, Kylia walked across the invisible floor and stood next to him to read the report as it imaged itself on the quicksilver surface of his desk. Her emerald eyes narrowed as she read the words. The smell of his daughter's faint perfume and the glitter of combs in her dark bronze hair brought a paternal smile to his face. Such a young lady. Such a young businesswoman. "Are you sure you want to concern yourself with this child?" he asked, wishing to shelter her from the grim news. Labor relations were so much more complex than technological innovations. Kylia just looked at him in annoyance that he would even ask the question. He read more details on what he had been told earlier in the day, though he still couldn't quite believe everything Leto Atreides claimed he'd heard and seen. A disturbance was brewing in the deep-ground manufacturing facilities, where the suboid workers had begun complaining. An unprecedented situation. Kylia took a deep breath, marshalling her thoughts. If the suboids have such grievances, why haven't they elected a spokesman? Why haven't they delivered any formal demands? Oh, they're just grumbling, child. They claim they're being forced to assemble machines in violation of the Butlerian Jihad, and they don't want to perform blasphemous labor. The message screen went dark after they finished reading the summary report, and Kylia stood up, hands on her hips. Her skirts rustled as she huffed. Wherever do they get such ridiculous ideas? How can they even begin to understand the nuances and complexities of running these operations? They were bred and trained in Ixian facilities. Who put those thoughts in their minds? Dominic shook his gleaming head and realized his daughter had raised a very good question. You're right. Suboids certainly couldn't come up with such extrapolations on their own. Kylia continued to be indignant. Don't they realize how much we give them? How much we provide and how much it costs? I've looked at the costs and benefits. The suboids don't know how good they have it compared to workers on other planets. She shook her head, and her curved mouth bent downward in a frown. She looked through the floor at her feet, to the manufactories in the cavern far below. Maybe they should visit Gidi Prime, or Arrakis. Then they wouldn't complain about Ix. But Dominic wouldn't let go of her first thread of conversation. Suboids are bred for limited intelligence, only enough to perform assigned tasks. And they're supposed to do it without complaining. It's part of their mental makeup. He joined his daughter in staring down at the floor of the grotto, which swarmed with highliner construction workers. Could our bio-designers have overlooked something important? Do the suboids have a point? The definition of machine minds encompasses a broad range, but there might be gray areas. Kylia shook her head and tapped her crystal pad. Our mentats and legal advisers are meticulous about the precise strictures of the jihad, and our quality control methods are effective. We're on solid ground, and they can prove every assertion we make. Dominic chewed his lower lip. The suboids couldn't possibly have specifics, since there aren't any violations. At least we haven't knowingly stepped over the line, not in any instance. Kylia studied her father, then looked down at the bustling work area again. Maybe you should have Captain Jaz and a team of inspectors turn over every stone, investigate every aspect of our design and manufacturing processes. Prove to the suboids that their complaints are groundless. Dominic considered the idea. Of course, I don't want to be too hard on the workers. I want no crackdowns, and certainly no revolts. The suboids are to be treated well, as always. He met her gaze, and she seemed very much an adult. Yes, Kylia said, her voice hardening. They work better that way. Like the knowledge of your own being, the Sietch forms a firm base from which you move out into the world and into the universe. Freeman teaching. Pardot Kynes was so fascinated by the Freeman culture, religion, and daily routine that he remained completely oblivious to the life and death debate raging around him in the Sietch. Naib Hainar had told him he could talk to the people and describe his ideas. And so he talked, at every opportunity. For an entire cycle of the moons, the Freemen whispered their opinions in small caves and dens, or shouted them across tables in private meetings of the Sietch elders. Some of them even empathized with what the strange outworlder was saying. Though his fate remained undecided, Kynes didn't slow for a moment. Sietch guides took him around and showed him many things they thought would interest him. But the planetologist also stopped to ask questions of women working in the still-suit factories, of old men tending water supplies, and of withered grandmothers operating solar ovens or filing rough burrs off scrap metal. The bustling activity around the sealed caves astonished him. Some workers trampled spice residue to extract fuel. Others curded spice for fermentation. Weavers at power looms used their own hair, the long fur of mutated rats, wisps of desert cotton, and even skin strips from wild creatures to make their durable fabric. And, of course, schools taught the young freemen desert skills, as well as ruthless combat techniques. One morning Kynes awoke refreshed, perfectly comfortable after spending the night on a mat on the hard floor. Throughout much of his life he had slept in the open on rough ground. His body could find rest just about anywhere. He breakfasted on dehydrated fruits and dry cakes the freeman women had baked in thermal ovens. The beginnings of a beard covered his face, a sandy stubble. A young woman named Freeth brought him a serving tray with meticulously prepared spice coffee in an ornate pot. During the entire ritual, she directed her deep blue eyes downward, as she had done every morning since Kynes's arrival at the Sietch. He hadn't thought anything of her cool, efficient attentions until someone had whispered to him, "She is the unmarried sister of Stilgar, whose life you saved against the Harkonnen dogs." Freeth had fine features and smooth, tanned skin. Her hair appeared long enough to flow to her waist, if ever she undid it from her water rings and let it fall. Her manner was quiet but all-knowing, in the freeman way. She rushed to fulfill every small wish Kynes bothered to express, often without his realizing it. He might have noticed how beautiful she was, had he not been so intent on noticing everything else around him. After he had sipped his pungent, cardamom-laced coffee down to the dregs, Kynes hauled out his electronic pad to jot down notes and ideas. At a noise he looked up to see wiry young Chorok standing in the doorway. "I'm to take you anywhere you wish, planetologist, so long as you remain within Redwall Sietch." Kynes nodded and smiled, disregarding the constraints of being a captive. They did not rankle him. It was understood that he would never leave the Sietch alive unless the freemen accepted him and decided to trust him completely. If he did join the community, there could be no secrets between them. On the other hand, if the freemen chose to execute him in the end, there would have been no point in keeping secrets from a dead man. Previously, Kynes had seen the tunnels, the food storage chambers, the guarded water supplies, even the Huanhui death stills. In fascination, he had watched the family groups of desert-hardened men, each with his several wives. He had seen them pray to Shai Hulud. He'd begun to compile a mental sketch of this culture and the political and familial ties within the Sietch. But it would take decades to unravel all the subtle relationships, all the nuances of obligations laid down upon their kinsmen many generations earlier. "I'd like to go to the top of the rock," he said, remembering his duties as Imperial planetologist. "If we could retrieve some of the equipment from my ground car, I presume you've kept it safe, I'd like to establish a weather station here. It's imperative that we collect climate data, temperature variations, atmospheric humidity, and wind patterns, from as many isolated spots as possible." Chirok looked at him, surprised and disbelieving. Then he shrugged. "As you wish, planetologist." Knowing the conservative ways of the Sietch elders, Chirok was pessimistic about the fate of this enthusiastic but not terribly bright man. What a futile effort it would be for Kynes to continue his vigorous work. But if it kept him happy in his last days— "Come," Chirok said, "put on your still suit." "Oh, we'll only be out for a few minutes." Chirok scowled at him, looking stern and much older. "A breath of moisture is water wasted into the air. We are not so rich we can afford to waste water." Shrugging, Kynes pulled on his crinkling, slick-surfaced uniform and took the time to attach all the seals, though he did so clumsily. Heaving a heavy sigh, Chirok assisted him, explaining the most effective way to dress out the suit and adjust the fittings to optimize its efficiency. "You have bought a decent still-suit. It is of Freeman manufacture," the young man observed. "In this at least you have chosen well." Kynes followed Chirrut to the storage chamber where his ground car had been kept. The Freeman had stripped it of amenities, and his equipment lay in open boxes on the cave floor, inspected and catalogued. No doubt the Sietch inhabitants had been trying to determine how they could put these things to use. "They're still planning to kill me," Kynes thought. "Haven't they heard a thing I've said?" Oddly, the thought neither depressed nor frightened him. He simply took the knowledge as a challenge. He was not about to give up. There was too much left to do. He would have to make them understand. Among the clutter he found his weather apparatus and tucked the components under his arms, but made no comment about what had been done to his possessions. He knew Freeman had a communal mentality. Every item owned by an individual was owned by the entire community. Since he had spent so much of his life alone, relying only on himself and his abilities, he found it difficult to absorb such a mindset. Chirrut did not offer to carry any of the equipment, but led the way up steep steps that had been rough-hewn into the stone wall. Kynes panted, but did not complain. Ahead of him the guide shifted aside numerous barricades, moisture baffles, and door seals. Chirrut flashed glances over his shoulder to make sure the planetologist was keeping up, then increased his speed. Finally they emerged from a cleft atop the rubble-strewn peaks. The young Freeman leaned back in the shadow of the rocks, keeping himself cool, while Kynes stepped out into open sunlight. All around them the stone was coppery brown with a few discolorations of lichen. A good sign, he thought. The advance footprints of biological systems. As he stared out at the sweeping vista of the great basin, he saw dunes that were the grayish-white and brown of newly decomposed rock grains, as well as the buttery yellow of older oxidized sand. From the sandworms he'd seen, as well as the teeming sand plankton in the spice-rich sands, Kynes knew that Dune already had the basis for a complex ecosystem. He was certain it would take only a few crucial nudges in the proper direction to make this dormant place blossom. The Freeman people could do it. "Imperial man," said Chirrut, stepping forward from the shade, "what is it you see when you stare out onto the desert like that?" Kynes answered without looking at him. "I see limitless possibilities." In a sealed chamber deep in the Sietch, wizened Hanar sat at the head of a stone table, glaring with his single eye. Trying to remain apart from the debate, the Sietch Naib watched the council elders shout at each other. "We know the man's loyalty," said one old man, Jareth. "He works for the Imperium. You've seen his dossier. He's on Dune as a guest of the Harkonnens." Jareth had a silver ring in his left earlobe, a treasure taken from a smuggler he'd killed in a duel. "That means nothing," said another elder, Aliyid. "As freemen, do we not don other clothes, other masks, and pretend to fit in? It's a means of survival when circumstances require it. You, of all people, should know not to judge someone solely on appearances." Garna, a weary-looking, long-haired elder, rested his pointed chin on his knuckles. "I'm most incensed at those 3 young idiots. What they did after the planetologist helped them defeat the Harkonnen Bravos. Any straight-thinking adult would have shrugged and sent the man's shade to join those of the 6 dead vermin on the ground. With some regret, of course, but still it should have been done." He sighed. "These are inexperienced youths, poorly trained. They should never have been left alone in the desert." Hanar flared his nostrils. "You cannot fault their thinking, Garna. There was the moral obligation. Pardot Kynes had saved their lives. Even brash young men such as those 3 realized the water burden that had been placed on them. But what of their obligations to Redwall Sietch and our people? long-haired Garna insisted. "Does a debt owed to a mere imperial servant outweigh their loyalty to us?" "The question isn't about the boys," Ali had interrupted. "Amum, Turak, and Stilgar did what they thought was best. We are now left to decide about this planetologist and his fate." "He's a madman," the first elder, Jareth, said. "Have you heard him talk? He wants trees, open water, irrigation, crops. He envisions a verdant planet instead of desert." A snort, then a toying with the ring in his ear. "He's mad, I say." A snort, then a toying with the ring in his ear. "He's mad, I say." Puckering his mouth skeptically, Aliad pointed out, "After the thousands of years of wandering that finally brought us here and made our people what we are, how can you scorn one man's dream of paradise?" Jareth frowned, but accepted the point. "Perhaps Kynes is mad," Garna said, "but just mad enough to be holy. Perhaps he's mad enough to hear the words of God in a way that we cannot." "That is a question we cannot decide among us," Einar said, finally using a Naib's voice of command to focus the discussion back on the matter at hand. "The choice we face is not about the word of God, but about the survival of our siege. Pardot Kynes has seen our ways, lived in our hidden home. By imperial command he sends reports back to Kytane whenever he finds himself in a city. Think of the risk to us." "But what of all his talk about paradise on Dune?" Ali had asked, still trying to defend the stranger. "Open water, dunes anchored by grass, palmeries filled with tall date palms, open qanats flowing across the desert." "Crazy talk and no more," grumbled Jareth. "The man knows too much. About us, about the freemen, about Dune. He cannot be allowed to hold such secrets." Doggedly, Aliad tried again. "But he killed Harkonnens. Doesn't that place upon us and our siege a water debt? He saved 3 members of our tribe." "Since when do we owe the Imperium anything?" Jareth asked, with another tug on his earring. "Anyone can kill Harkonnens," Garna added with a shrug, shifting his pointed chin to his other fist. "I've done it myself." Einar leaned forward. "All right, Aliad. What of this talk about the flowering of Dune? Where is the water for all this? Is there any possibility the planetologist can do what he says?" "Haven't you heard him?" Garna replied in a mocking tone. "He says the water is here, far more than the miserable amounts we collect for our sustenance." Jareth raised his eyebrows and snorted. "Oh, this man has been on our world for a standard month or 2, and already he knows where to find the precious treasure that no freeman has discovered in generations upon generations of living in the desert. An oasis on the equator, perhaps. Ha!" "He did save 3 of our own," Aliad persisted. 3 fools put themselves in the way of the Harkonnen fist. I feel no obligation to him for their rescue. And he has seen crysknives. You know our law. Who sees that knife must be cleansed or slain." Garna's voice trailed off. "It is as you say," Aliad admitted. "Kynes is known to travel alone and explore many inhospitable areas," Einar said with a shrug. "If he disappears, he disappears. No Harkonnen or Imperium officials will ever be the wiser." "It will no doubt be interpreted as a simple accident. Our world is not a comfortable place," said Garna. Jareth simply smiled. "If the truth is told, the Harkonnens may be perfectly happy to get rid of this meddlesome man anyway. There is no risk to us if we kill him." Silence hung in the dusty air for a moment. "What must be, Einar said. rising to his feet at the head of the table. "All of us know this. There can be no other answer, no changing of our minds. We must protect the Sietch above all, no matter the cost, no matter the burden it places on our hearts." He crossed his arms over his chest. "It is decided. Kynes must die." "238 planets searched, many of only marginal habitability. See star charts attached in separate file. Resource surveys list valuable raw materials. Many of these planets deserve a second look, either for mineral exploitation or possible colonization. As in previous reports, however, no spice found. Independent Scout Survey, 3rd Expedition, delivered to Emperor Fondil Corino III. Hasimir Fenring had bribed old Elrood's guards and retainers, setting up what he called a surprise secret meeting with an important, though unexpected, representative. The weasel-faced man had used his silken tongue and his iron will to manipulate the Emperor's schedules to leave an opening. As a fixture around the palace for more than 3 decades, Fenring, by virtue of his association with Crown Prince Shaddam, was a man of influence. With various methods of persuasion, he convinced everyone he needed to convince. Old Elrood suspected nothing. At the appointed hour of the Tleilaxu delegate's arrival, Fenring made certain he and Shaddam were present in the audience chamber, ostensibly as eager students of the bureaucracy, intent on becoming viable leaders of the Imperium. Elrood, who liked to think he was instructing these protégés in important matters of state, had no idea the 2 young men laughed at him behind his back. Fenring leaned close to the Crown Prince and whispered in his ear, "This is going to be most entertaining, huh?" "Watch and learn," Shaddam said ponderously, then raised his chin in the air and snickered. The huge embossed doors swung open, sparkling with sousstones and rain crystals, etched with glavan metal. Sardaukar guards, standing stiff and formal in their gray and black uniforms, snapped to attention for the new arrival. "Now the show begins," Fenring said. He and Shaddam kept further chuckles to themselves. Liveried house pages stepped forward to introduce the off-world visitor in a rippling overtone of processed, electronically translated pomp. "My Lord Emperor, Highness of 1,000,000 worlds, the Master Hidar Fen Ajidika, representative of the Bene Tleilax, is here at your request for a private meeting." A gnome-like man with grayish skin walked proudly into the hall, flanked by pasty-faced guards and his own retainers. His slippered feet scuttled like whispered gossip across the polished stones of the floor. A ripple of surprise and distaste passed through the attendees at court. Chamberlain Aken Hesban, his mustaches drooping, stood indignantly behind the throne and glared at the Emperor's scheduling advisers as if this were some sort of trick. Elrood IX lurched forward in his massive throne and demanded to see his calendar. Thus, caught off guard, the old reprobate might just be surprised enough to listen, Fenring thought. With surprising astuteness, Chamberlain Hesban's eagle gaze fell upon him, but Fenring returned the look with only a bland, curious expression. Ajidika, the Tleilaxu representative, waited patiently, letting the chatters and whispers flow around him. He had a narrow face, long nose, and a pointed black beard that protruded like a trowel from his cleft chin. Maroon robes gave Ajidika an air of some importance. His skin was weathered-looking, and pale and discolored blotches marked his hands, especially on the fingers and palms, as if frequent exposure to harsh chemicals had neutralized the melanin. Despite his diminutive stature, The Tleilaxu master came forward as if he had a perfect right to be in the imperial audience chamber of Kytane. From the side of the room Shaddam studied Ajidica, and his nose wrinkled from the lingering food odors that were so characteristic of the Tleilaxu. "May the one true God shine his light upon you from all the stars in the Imperium, my Lord Emperor," said Hidar Fen Ajidica, placing his palms together and bowing as he quoted from the Orange Catholic Bible. He stopped in front of the massive Hagal quartz throne. The Tleilaxu were notorious for handling the dead and harvesting corpses for cellular resources, yet they were unquestionably brilliant geneticists. One of their first creations had been a remarkable new food source, the slig, sweetest meat this side of heaven, a cross between a giant slug and a Terran pig. The overall populace still thought of sligs as tank-bred mutations, however, ugly creatures who excreted slimy, foul-smelling residue, and whose multiple mouths ground incessantly on garbage. This was the context in which people thought of the Bene Tleilax, even as they savored marinated slig medallions in sauces prepared from rich Caladan wines. Elwood drew back his bony shoulders into a firm line. He frowned down at the visitor. "What is this doing here? Who let this man in?" The old emperor looked around the echoing room, his eyes flashing bright. "No Tleilaxu master has ever entered my court for a private audience. How do I know he's not a face-dancer mimic?" Elrood glared down at his personal secretary, then over at his chamberlain. "And since he got on my schedule at all, how do I know you're not a face-dancer yourself? This is outrageous!" The personal secretary stepped back, appalled at the suggestion. Diminutive Ajidica looked up at the emperor, calmly letting the resentment and prejudice wash past without being affected by it. "My Lord Elrood, tests can be performed to prove that none of our shape-shifters has subsumed the identity of anyone in your court. I assure you I am no face-dancer. Neither am I an assassin nor a mentat." "And why are you here?" Elrood demanded. "As one of the premier scientists of the Bene Tleilax, my presence here was requested." The gnomish man hadn't moved a centimeter, and remained at the foot of the golden lion throne, unflappable in his maroon robes. "I have developed an ambitious plan that can benefit the imperial family, as well as my own people." "Not interested," the Padishah Emperor said. He flicked a glance at his Sardaukar, began to raise his gnarled hand to issue a command of forceful dismissal. The court attendees watched, amused and eager. Asimir Fenring rapidly stepped forward, knowing he had only an instant to intercede. "Emperor Elrood, may I speak?" He didn't wait for permission, but tried to appear innocent and interested. "The sheer audacity of this Tleilaxu's arrival has me curious. I find myself wondering what he has to say." He glanced over at the emotion-masked face of Hidar Fen Ajidica. The gray-skinned master seemed impervious to any harsh treatment foisted upon him. Nothing in his demeanor betrayed his connection with Fenring, who had suggested the synthetic spice idea to him, an idea that had quickly found support among Tleilaxu scientists. Crown Prince Shaddam took the lead and looked up at his father with a guileless, anticipatory expression. "Father, you have instructed me to learn everything I can from the example of your leadership. It would be most educational for me to observe how you handle this situation with an open mind and a firm hand." Elrood raised a ring-adorned hand that trembled with faint, uncontrollable spasms. "Very well. We will hear briefly what this Tleilaxu has to say. Briefly, under pain of severe punishment if we determine he has wasted our precious time. Watch and learn." The Emperor slid a sidelong glance at Shaddam, then took a sip of the spice beer at his side. "This shouldn't take much time." "How true, Father. You don't have much time left," Shaddam thought, still smiling attentively and innocently. "My words require privacy, my Lord Emperor," Adjidika said, "and the utmost discretion." "I will determine that," Elrood snapped. "Speak of your plan." The Tleilaxu master folded his hands in the voluminous sleeves of his maroon robes. "Rumors are like a disease epidemic, sire. Once they escape, they spread from person to person, often with deadly effect. Better to take simple initial precautions than be forced into eradication measures at a later date." Adjidika fell silent, standing rigid, and refused to speak further until the audience chamber had been emptied. Impatiently the Emperor gestured to dismiss all the functionaries, pages, ambassadors, jesters, and guards. Sardaukar security men stationed themselves at the doorways, where they could protect the throne. But everyone else departed, muttering and shuffling. Humming privacy screens were erected to prevent any potential eavesdroppers from listening in. Fenring and Shaddam sat at the foot of the throne, pretending to be intent students, though they were both in their 30s. Looking frail and battling illness, the old emperor indicated for them to remain as observers, and the Tleilaxu man did not object. In all this time, Adjidika's hard gaze never strayed from Elrood. The Emperor looked back at the little man, feigning boredom. Finally satisfied with the privacy precautions, and ignoring the Emperor's distaste for him and his race, Hidar Fen Adjidika spoke. "We Bene Tleilax have continued experiments in all areas of genetics, organic chemistry, and mutations. In our factories, we have recently developed highly unorthodox techniques to synthesize, shall we say, unusual substances." His words were clipped and efficient, providing no more detail than necessary. "Our initial results indicate that a synthetic could be fashioned that, in all important chemical properties, is identical to melange." "Spice?" Elrood now gave the Tleilaxu his full attention. Shaddam noticed a twitching tick in his father's right cheek below his eye. "Created in a laboratory? Impossible!" "Not impossible, my lord. Given the proper time and conditions for development, this artificially created spice could become an inexhaustible supply, mass-produced and inexpensive. And it could be earmarked exclusively for House Carino, if you wish." Elrood leaned forward like a mummified carrion bird. "Such a thing has never been possible before." "Our analysis shows that the spice is an organically based substance. Through careful experimentation and development, we believe our axolotl tanks can be modified to produce melange." "The same way you grow golas from dead human cells?" the Emperor said, scowling with revulsion. "And clones?" Intrigued and surprised, Shaddam glanced over at Fenring. "Axolotl tanks?" Adjidika continued to focus on Elrood. "In effect, my lord." "Why come to me?" Elrood asked. "I should think the diabolical Tleilaxu would create a spice substitute for themselves and leave the Imperium at their mercy." "The Bene Tleilax are not a mighty race, sire. If we discovered how to produce our own melange and kept the secret for ourselves, we know it would bring down the wrath of the Imperium. You yourself would send in Sardaukar, tear the secret from our grasp, and destroy us. The Spacing Guild and Choam would be happy to assist you, and the Harkonnens, too, would defend their spice monopoly at all costs." Adjidika gave a thin, humorless smile. "It's good to see that you understand your subordinate position," Elrood said, resting his bony elbow on the arm of the heavy throne. "Not even the wealthiest great house has ever developed a military force to oppose my Sardaukar. Thus, we have prudently decided to ingratiate ourselves with the most powerful presence in the galaxy, the Imperial House. In that way, we can reap the greatest benefit from our new research." Elrood placed a long finger on his papery lips, considering. These Tleilaxu were clever, and if they could manufacture the substance exclusively for House Corrino, and cost-effectively, the Emperor would have a powerful bargaining chip. The economic difference could be huge. House Harkonnen could be driven into the ground, bankrupted. Arrakis would become of little value, with the product there comparatively expensive to get out of the sand. If this gnome could do as he suggested, the Landsraad, Choam, the Spacing Guild, the Mentats, and the Bene Gesserit would be forced to seek favors from the Emperor in order to get their supplies. Most of the important scions of noble families were already addicted to melange, and Elrood himself could become their supplier. Excitement blossomed within him. Ajidica interrupted Elrood's train of thought. "Let me emphasize that this will be no simple task, sire. The precise chemical structure of melange is extraordinarily difficult to analyze, and we must separate out which components are necessary for the substance to be effective, and which are irrelevant. In order to achieve this goal, the Tleilaxu will require enormous resources, as well as the freedom and time to pursue our avenues of research." Fenring shifted on the polished steps, and, while looking up at the old Emperor, interjected. "My lord, I see now that Master Ajidica was right in seeking privacy for this audience. Such an undertaking must be carried out entirely in secret if House Corrino is to have an exclusive source. Certain powers in the Imperium would do anything to prevent you from creating an independent and inexpensive supply of spice, Fenring could see that the old man recognized the enormous political and economic advantages Ajidica's proposal could bring him, even in light of everyone's instinctive loathing for the Tleilaxu. He sensed the balance shifting, the senile Emperor coming to exactly the conclusion Fenring wished. Yes, the ancient creature can still be manipulated. Elrood himself saw many forces hanging in the balance. Since the Harkonnens were ambitious and intractable, he would have preferred to place another great house in charge of Arrakis, but the Baron would remain in power for decades yet. For political reasons, the Emperor had been forced to grant this valuable quasi-fief to House Harkonnen after ousting Richies, and the new fief-holders had dug themselves in. Too much so. Even the debacle of Abelord's governorship — he'd been installed in his position at the request of his father, Dimitri Harkonnen — had not brought the desired result. The effect had been the exact opposite, in fact, once the Baron had maneuvered himself into a position of power. But what to do with Arrakis afterward, Elrood thought. I would want total control of it as well. Without its monopoly on spice, the place might come cheap. At the right price, it could prove useful for something else. An incredibly harsh military training area, perhaps. "You were correct in bringing your ideas to our attention, Hidarfen Ajidica." Elrood clasped his hands on his lap, clinking gold rings together, refusing to apologize for his earlier rudeness. "Please give us a detailed summary of your needs." "Yes, my Lord Emperor." Ajidica bowed again, keeping his hands folded in his billowing maroon sleeves. "Most importantly, my people will need equipment and resources, a place in which to do our research. I will be in charge of this program myself, but the Bene Tleilax require an appropriate technological base and industrial facilities, preferably ones that are already functional and well defended." Elrood pondered the question. Surely among all the worlds in the Imperium there must be some place, a high-tech world with industrial capabilities. Puzzle pieces snicked into place, and he saw it. A way to obliterate his old rival, House Vernius. Payback for Dominic's effrontery involving the royal concubine Shando, and for the new highliner design that threatened to wreak havoc on Imperial profit systems. Oh, this will be magnificent! Sitting on the steps to the crystal pedestal of the throne, Hasimir Fenring did not understand why the Emperor smiled with such smug satisfaction. The silence drew out for a long moment. He wondered if it might have something to do with the mind-eating effects of the slow chaumerky. The old man would soon become increasingly irrational and paranoid, and after that he would die. Horribly, I hope. But before then all the proper wheels would have been set in motion. "Yes, Hida Fen Ajidica, we do have the place for your efforts, I believe," Elrood said. "A perfect place." Dominic must not know until it is too late, the Emperor thought. And then he must know who did it to him, right before he dies. The timing, as in so many matters of the Imperium, had to be precise. The Spacing Guild has worked for centuries to surround our elite navigators with mystique. They are revered, from the lowest pilot to the most talented steersman. They live in tanks of spice gas, see all paths through space and time, guide ships to the far reaches of the Imperium. But no one knows the human cost of becoming a navigator. We must keep this a secret, for if they really knew the truth, they would pity us. Spacing Guild Training Manual Handbook for Steersmen, classified. The austere Guild Embassy building contrasted severely with the rest of Ixian grandeur in the stalactite city. The structure was drab, utilitarian, and gray, among the sparkling and ornate cavern towers. The Spacing Guild had priorities beyond ornamentation or ostentation. Today Kater and Demur Pilru would be tested, in hopes of becoming guild navigators. Kater didn't know whether to be excited or terrified. As the twin brothers marched shoulder to shoulder across a shielded crystal walkway from the Grand Palais, Kater found the embassy building so aesthetically repulsive that he considered turning around and leaving. In the face of the guild's enormous wealth, the lack of splendor seemed odd, to the point of making him ill at ease. As if thinking the same thing, but coming to a different conclusion, his brother looked at Kater and said, "Once the wonders of space are opened up to a guild navigator's mind, what other decorations are necessary? How can any ornamentation rival the wonders a navigator sees on a single journey through fold space? The universe, brother! The whole universe!" Kater nodded, conceding the point. "All right. We'll both have to use different criteria from now on. Think outside the box. Remember what old Davy Rogo used to tell us? Things are going to be so changed." If he passed these examinations, he would have to be up to the challenge, though he had no real desire to leave the beautiful cavern city of Vernii. His mother, Satina, was an important guild banker, his father a respected ambassador, and, with help from Earl Vernius himself, they had arranged to give the twins this remarkable chance. He would make Ix proud of him. Maybe someone would erect a sculpture in his honor some day, or name a side grotto after him and his brother. While their father attended to diplomatic duties with the Emperor and 1,000 functionaries on Kytane, his twin sons remained in the underground city, grooming and preparing themselves for bigger things. Over the years of their subterranean childhood, Kater and his brother had come to the guild facility many times to see their mother. Always before, they had been guests in the building, but this time the twins were going for a much more rigorous ordeal. Kater's future would be determined in a few hours. Bankers, auditors, and commerce specialists were all humans, bureaucrats. But a navigator was so much more. No matter how much he tried to shore up his confidence, Kater wasn't certain he would pass the mind-twisting tests anyway. Who was he to think he could become one of the elite guild navigators? His high-ranking parents had only given the twins an opportunity to be considered, not a guarantee. Could he make the cut? Was he really that special? He ran a hand through his dark hair, found sweat on his fingertips. If you perform well enough on the test, you'll both become important representatives of the Spacing Guild, his mother had said, smiling with a severe pride. Very important. Kater felt a lump grow in his throat, and Demur drew himself taller. Kylia Vernius, princess of the household of Ix, had also wished the two of them well. Kater suspected the Earl's daughter was leading them on, but he and his brother both enjoyed flirting with her. Occasionally they even pretended to be jealous when Kylia referred in passing to young Leto, heir to House Atreides. She played the twins against each other, and he and Demur engaged in a good-natured rivalry for her affections. Still, he doubted their families would ever agree to a match, so it was unlikely that there could be any future in it. If Kater joined the guild, his duties would take him far from Ix and the underground metropolis he loved so well. If he became a navigator, so many things would change. They arrived in front of the embassy reception chamber, half an hour early. Demur paced beside his anxious brother, who was entranced and non-communicative, as if completely focused on his thoughts and desires. Though the two young men looked identical, Demur seemed so much stronger, so much more dedicated to the challenge, and Kater struggled to emulate him. Now, in the waiting area, he swallowed hard, repeating the words he and his brother had shared, like a mantra, in their quarters that morning. I want to be a navigator. I want to join the guild. I want to leave Ix and sail the star lanes, my mind joined to the universe. At 17, they both felt rather young to endure such a grueling selection process, one that would lock them permanently on a life path, no matter what they might decide later on. But the guild wanted resilient and malleable minds inside bodies that had sufficiently matured. Navigators who trained at young ages often proved to be the best performers, some even reaching the highest rank of steersman. Those candidates, taken too early, however, could mutate into ghastly shapes fit only for menial tasks. The worst failures were euthanized. Are you ready, brother? Demur asked. Kater drew strength and enthusiasm from his twin's confidence. Absolutely, he said. We're going to be navigators after today, you and I. Fighting misgivings, Kater reassured himself that he wanted this. It would be a great credit to his abilities, an honor for his family. But he could not remove the specter of doubt that nagged at him. In his heart, he didn't want to leave Ix. His father, the ambassador, had instilled in both of his sons a deep appreciation for the underground engineering marvels, the innovations, and the technological acumen of this planet. Ix was like no other world in the Imperium. And, of course, if he left, Kylia would be forever lost to him as well. When they were summoned forward, deeper into the labyrinth of the embassy, the twins walked through the portal, side by side, feeling very alone. They had no escorts, no one to cheer them to victory or console them if they failed. Their father wasn't even present to offer his support. The ambassador had recently been sent to Kytane in preparation for another Landsraad subcommittee meeting. That morning, as the ominous hour ticked closer and closer, Kater and Demur had sat at the breakfast table in the ambassadorial residence, picking over a selection of colored pastries, while Satina played a message their father had hollow-recorded for them. They'd had little appetite, but they listened to Kamar Pilru's words. Kater tried to hear some special hints or knowledge, anything he could use. But the ambassador's shimmering image merely gave them encouragement and platitudes, like echoes of a well-worn speech he had used many times in his diplomatic duties. Then, after a final hug, their mother had stared at each of them before she hurried off to her daily duties at Guild Bank headquarters, a section of the drab building that now hung before them. Satina had wanted to be at her son's side during the testing, but the Guild had forbidden it. Navigator testing was an intensely private and personal matter. Each of them had to do it by himself, relying on his abilities alone. So their mother would be in her office, probably distracted, probably worried for them. As Satina said goodbye, she did manage to hide most of the horror and despair on her face. Kater had noticed the flicker, but Demur had not. He wondered what his mother had hidden from them during their preparations for the test. Doesn't she want us to succeed? Navigators were the stuff of legends, shrouded in secrecy and guild-fostered superstitions. Kater had heard whispered rumors about bodily distortions, the damage that intense and constant immersion in spice could wreak upon a human physique. No outsider had ever seen a navigator, so how were those people to know what kind of changes might surge through the body of someone with such phenomenal mental abilities? He and his brother had laughed at the silly speculations, convincing each other how outrageous such ideas could be. But are they so outrageous? What does Mother fear? Kater, keep focused. You look upset, Demur said. Kater's tone overflowed with sarcasm. Upset? Absolutely. I wonder why. We are about to take the biggest test of our lives, and no one knows how to study for it. I'm worried we haven't prepared enough. Demur looked at him with intense concern, gripping his brother's arm. Your nervousness may be your failing, brother. A navigator test isn't about studying. It's about natural ability and the potential to expand our minds. We have to pass safely through the void. Now it's your turn to remember what old Davy Rogo told us. You can only be successful if you let your mind go beyond the boundaries that other people have set for themselves. Kater, open up your imagination and go beyond the boundary with me. His brother's confidence seemed unshakable, and Kater had no choice but to nod. Davy Rogo. Until this morning, he hadn't thought about the crippled and eccentric Ixian inventor in years. When they'd been 10, the twins had met the famous innovator Rogo. Their father had introduced them, imaged holograms of them with the man for the ambassadorial scrapbook shelf, then fluttered off to meet other important people. The two boys, though, had continued talking with the inventor, and he had invited them to visit his laboratory. For 2 years afterward, Rogo had set himself up as an offbeat mentor to Kater and Demur, until his death. Now the twins had only Davy Rogo's advice to remember, and his confidence that they would succeed. Rogo would be scolding me for my doubts now, Kater thought. Think about it, brother. How does one practice for the job of moving huge ships from one star system to another in the wink of an eye? To demonstrate, Demur winked. You'll pass. We both will. Get ready to swim in spice gas. As they strode up to the embassy's inner reception desk, Kater stared across the underground city of Vernii, beyond the glittering chains of glow globes that illuminated the site, where another highliner was already under construction. Perhaps someday he would fly that very vessel. Thinking of how the visiting navigator had whisked the immense new highliner out of the cavern and into open space, the young man felt an infusion of desire. He loved Ix, wanted to stay here, wanted to see Kylea one last time. But he also wanted to be a navigator. The brothers identified themselves and waited. They stood together at the flat marble plaza counter in silence, each brooding with personal thoughts, as if a trance might increase their chances of succeeding. I will keep my mind completely open, ready for anything. A shapely female testing proctor appeared in a loose gray suit. The guild's infinity symbol was stitched on her lapel, but she wore no jewelry or other ornamentation. "Welcome," she said, without introducing herself. "The guild seeks the finest talent because our work is the most important. Without us, without space travel, the fabric of the Imperium would unravel. Think on that, and you will realize how selective we must be." She did not smile at all. Her hair was reddish-brown and close-cropped. Kater would have found her attractive at any other time, but now he could think of nothing beyond the impending examination. Checking their identification yet again, the proctor escorted the brothers to isolated, separate testing chambers. "This is an individual test, and each of you must face it alone. There is no way you can cheat, or even help each other," she said. Alarmed at being separated, Kater and Demur looked at each other, then silently wished the other luck. The chamber door closed behind Demur with a loud and frightening slam. His ears popped from the difference in air pressure. He was alone, intensely alone. But he knew he was up to the challenge. Confidence is half the battle. He noted the armored walls, the sealed cracks, the lack of ventilation. Hissing gas boiled from a single nozzle in the ceiling, thickening clouds of rusty orange, with a sharp, gingery tang that burned his nostrils. Poison? Drugs? Then Demur realized what the guild had in mind for him. Melange. Closing his eyes, he smelled the unmistakable cinnamon odor of the rare spice. Rich melange. An incredible wealth of it in the confined air, filling the chamber and permeating his every breath. Knowing the value of Arrakis spice from his mother's meticulous work in the guild bank, Demur sucked in another large gulp. The sheer cost of this! No wonder the guild didn't test just anyone. The price for a single examination would be enough to build a housing complex on another planet. The wealth controlled by the Spacing Guild, in banking, transportation, and exploration, awed him. The guild went everywhere, touched everyone. He wanted to be part of it. Why did they need frivolous ornamentation when they had so much melange? He felt possibilities spinning all around him like an elaborate contour map, with ripples and intersections, a locus of points, and paths that led into and out of the void. He opened his mind so that the spice could transport him anywhere in the universe. It seemed like such a natural thing to do. As the orange fog enfolded Demur, he could no longer see the featureless walls of the testing chamber. He felt melange pressing into his every pore and cell. The sensation was marvelous. He envisioned himself as a revered navigator, expanding his mind to the farthest reaches of the Imperium, encompassing everything. Demur soared along, without leaving the test chamber. Or so he thought. The test was far worse than Kater could have imagined. No one ever told him what he was expected to do. He never had a chance. He choked on the spice gas, became dizzy, fought to keep control of his faculties. The melange overdose stupefied him, so that he could not remember who he was or why he was there. He struggled to maintain focus, but lost himself. When he eventually returned to consciousness, his clothes clean and his hair and skin freshly washed, perhaps so the guild could reclaim every particle of melange, the shapely, red-haired proctor looked down at him. She gave Kater a winsome, sad smile, and shook her head. "You blocked your mind to the spice gas, thereby shackling yourself to the normal world." Her next words came like a death sentence. "The guild cannot use you." Kater sat up, coughing. He sniffed, and his nostrils still tingled from the potent cinnamon stench. "I'm sorry nobody explained what I was supposed to—" She helped him to his feet, anxious to usher him out of the embassy building. His heart felt like molten lead. The proctor didn't need to answer him as she led him out to the reception area. Kater looked around, searching for his brother, but the waiting room was empty. Then he learned that his own failure wasn't the worst thing he had to face. "Where's Demur? Did he succeed?" Kater's voice filled with hope. The proctor nodded. "Admirably." She extended her hand toward the exit, but he sidestepped her. Kater looked back toward the inner corridor and the sealed testing chamber where his brother had gone. He needed to congratulate Demur, even though the victory was now bittersweet. At least one of them would become a navigator. "You will never see your brother again," the proctor said coldly. She moved to block the way back in. "Demur Pilru is ours now." Recovering after an instant of shock, Kater broke past the proctor and ran to the sealed chamber door. He pounded against it and shouted, but received no answer. Within minutes, guild guards surrounded him, more businesslike than gentle, and peeled him away. Still dizzy from the unaccustomed after-effects of melange exposure, Kater didn't realize where they were taking him. Blinking and disoriented, he found himself standing on the crystal walkway outside the blocky gray embassy. Below him, other walkways and streets bustled with traffic and pedestrians traveling from one tower building to another. Now he was more alone than ever. The testing proctor stood on the embassy steps, barring Kater from re-entering. Even though his mother worked somewhere inside, deep in the banking section, Kater knew that the doors of this facility, as well as the doors to the future he had counted on, were now locked to him. "Rejoice for your brother," the proctor called from the steps, her voice finally showing some life. "He has entered another world. He can travel to places you'll never imagine." "I can never see him or talk to him again," Kater said, as if part of him had been ripped away. "Doubtful," the proctor said, crossing her arms over her chest. She gave him an apologetic frown. "Unless he suffers a reversal. His first time your brother immersed himself so completely in the spice gas that he started the conversion process right there and then. The guild cannot deny such talent. He has already started to change." "Bring him back," Kater said, his eyes tear-filled now. He prayed for his brother. "Just for a little while." He wanted to be happy for his twin, and proud. Demur had passed the test that meant so much to both of them. The twins had always been so close. How could they possibly go on without one another? Perhaps his mother could use her guild banking connections so that they would at least be able to have their farewells. Or maybe his father would use ambassadorial privilege to get Demur back. But Kater knew that would never happen. He could see that now. His mother had already known it, had been afraid of losing both sons. The process is, in the majority of cases, irreversible, the proctor said with finality. Guild security guards marched out to stand beside her, ensuring that Kater did not become irrational and try to force his way inside. "Trust me," said the proctor. "You don't want your brother back." The human body is a machine, a system of organic chemicals, fluid conduits, electrical impulses. A government is likewise a machine of interacting societies, laws, cultures, rewards and punishments, patterns of behavior. Ultimately, the universe itself is a machine, planets around suns, stars gathered into clusters, clusters and other suns forming entire galaxies. Our job is to keep the machinery functioning. Suk Inner School, Primary Doctrine. Both frowning, Crown Prince Shaddam and Chamberlain Aken Hesban watched the approach of a diminutive, scrawny man who nonetheless walked as tall as a Mutelian giant. After years of training and conditioning, all Suk doctors seemed compelled to take themselves far too seriously. "That Elish Yungar looks more like a circus performer than a respected medical professional," Shaddam said, looking at the arched eyebrows, black eyes, and the steel-gray ponytail. "I hope he knows what he's doing. I want only the best care for my poor ailing father." Beside him, Hesban tugged on one of his long mustaches, but made no response. He wore a floor-length blue robe with golden piping. For years, Shaddam had disliked this pompous man who hovered too close to his father's presence, and he vowed to choose a new chamberlain after assuming the throne. And so long as this Suk doctor could find no explanation for Elrood's gradually worsening illness, Shaddam's ascendancy would be assured. Hasimir Fenring had emphasized that even all the resources of the exalted Suk Inner School could not stop what had been set in motion. The catalyst chemical implanted in the old man's brain would register on no poison snooper, since it was not itself poison, but would only convert to a dangerous substance in the presence of spice beer. And as he felt worse and worse, old Elrood consumed ever-increasing quantities of the beer. No more than a meter in height, the shrunken doctor had smooth skin, but ancient eyes from the vast medical knowledge hammered into his mind. A black diamond tattoo marked the center of Yungar's creased forehead. His ponytail of steel-gray hair, secured in the back by a silver Suk ring, was longer than a woman's, reaching nearly to the floor. Wasting no time on further pleasantries, Elish Yungar broached a familiar subject. "You have our payment?" He looked first at the chamberlain, then at the crown prince, where his gaze settled. "Fresh accounts must be established before we can begin treatment. Given the Emperor's age, our care could be quite prolonged, and ultimately fruitless. He must pay his bills like every other citizen. King, miner, basket weaver. It makes no difference to us. Every human wants to be healthy, and we cannot treat everyone. Our care is available only to those willing and able to pay for it." Shaddam rested a hand on the chamberlain's sleeve. "Ah, yes, we will spare no expense for my father's health, Aken. It is already arranged." They stood just inside the high-arched doorway of the imperial audience chamber, beneath glorious ceiling frescoes of epic events from the history of the Corino family. The blood of the jihad, the desperate last stand on the bridge of Hrethgir, the destruction of thinking machines. Shaddam had always found ancient imperial history ponderous and boring, with little relevance to his current goals. Centuries and centuries ago didn't matter. He just hoped it wouldn't take that long for a change in the palace. In the echoing hall, the Padishah Emperor's magnificent jeweled throne sat invitingly empty. Court functionaries and a few dark-robed Bene Gesserit scuttled about inside passages and alcoves, trying to remain unseen. A pair of heavily armed Sardaukar guards stood at the dais steps, attentive. Shaddam wondered whether they would obey him right now, knowing his father lay sick in his chambers. He decided not to test the idea too soon. "We are all familiar with promises," the doctor said. "Still, I wish to see the payment first." Stubborn tone, an impertinent upward gaze that didn't move from Shaddam, even though the Crown Prince hadn't done much talking. Yungar chose to play strange power games, but soon he would be out of his league. "Payment before even looking at the patient?" the Chamberlain gasped. "Where are your priorities, man?" Finally, Dr. Yungar deigned to look over at Hezban. "You have dealt with us before, Chamberlain, and you know the costs of producing a Suk doctor, fully conditioned, fully trained." As heir to the Golden Lion throne, Shaddam was familiar with Suk imperial conditioning, which guaranteed absolute loyalty to a patient. In centuries of medical history, no one had ever managed to subvert a graduate of the inner school. Some members of the royal court had a hard time reconciling the legendary Suk loyalty with their incessant greed. The doctors never wavered from the clear but unstated position that they would not minister to anyone, not even to an emperor, on a mere promise of remuneration. Suk doctors extended no credit. Payment had to be tangible and immediate. Yungar spoke in an irritating whine. "Though we are perhaps not as prominent as the Mentats or the Bene Gesserit, the Suk school is still one of the greatest in the Imperium. My equipment alone costs more than most planets." Yungar pointed to a suspensor pod at his side. "I do not receive your payment on my own behalf, of course. I am only a custodian, holding it in a fiduciary capacity. When I return, your credits go with me to the Suk school for the benefit of mankind." Hezban glared at him with unconcealed loathing, his face turning ruddy, his mustaches twitching. "Or at least to benefit that portion of mankind that can afford your services." "Correct, Chamberlain." Seeing the doctor's staunch and misplaced self-importance, Shaddam shuddered. When he sat on the throne himself, he wondered if he could initiate any changes to put these Suks in their place. He caught his rambling thoughts and quelled them. All in due time. He sighed. His father Elrood had let too many threads of control slip right through his fingers. Fenring was right. As much as Shaddam despised dirtying his fingers with blood, removing the ancient emperor was a necessary action. "If cost of treatment is your paramount concern," the Suk doctor said, quietly goading the Chamberlain, "you are welcome to hire a less expensive physician for the emperor of the known universe." "Enough bickering. Come with me, Doctor," Shaddam said, taking charge. Dr. Yungar nodded, then turned his back on the Chamberlain, as if he was of no consequence whatsoever. "Now I know why you people have the shape of a diamond tattooed on your foreheads," Hezban growled as he followed behind them. "You always have treasure on your minds." The Crown Prince led the way to a security-shielded antechamber and passed through a shimmering electrical curtain to the inner vault. On a golden table at the center of the room lay opifire pendants, dannikins of melange, and fold pouches partially open to reveal glittering sue-stones. "This will be sufficient," the Suk said. unless the treatment proves to be more involved than we expect." With his floating equipment pod at his side like a dutiful pet dog, the doctor shuffled back the way they had come. "I already know the way to the Emperor's chamber." Without explanation, Yungar hurried through a doorway and up the grand staircase that led to the guarded bedroom suites where the Emperor rested. Sardaukar guards remained behind at the force field that protected the treasure vault, while Shaddam and Hezban marched after the doctor. Fenring would already be waiting at the dying old man's side, making his annoying humming noises and making sure none of the treatment could potentially be successful. The withered Emperor lay on an enormous four-poster bed beneath a canopy of the finest myrrh silks embroidered in the ancient Terran method. The bedposts were carved uka, a fast-growing hardwood native to Alaka. Soothing fountains, set into alcoves in the walls, trickled fresh water, bubbling and whispering. Scented glow globes, tuned to the low range, floated in the corners of the room. As Shaddam and Fenring stood together and watched, the Suk doctor waved a liveried attendant away and mounted the 2 shallow steps to the bedside. 3 lovely imperial concubines hovered behind the ailing man, as if their mere presence could revitalize him. The old man's stink clung to the air, despite the ventilation and the incense. Emperor Elrood wore slick royal satins and an old-fashioned sleeping cap that covered his liver-spotted scalp. He lay atop the covers, since he had complained about being too warm. The man looked haggard, could barely keep his eyes open. Shaddam was pleased to see how markedly his father's health had declined since the Tleilaxu ambassador's visit. Still, Elrood had good days and bad days, and he had the annoying habit of recovering his vitality after a significant downslide like this one. A tall mug of cool spice beer rested on a tray beside his clawed and ring-bedecked hand, next to a second empty mug. And, mounted on the bed canopy, Shaddam noted the waving insect arms of a poison snooper. "You must be thirsty, father," Shaddam thought. "Drink more of the beer." The doctor opened his suspensor pod to reveal shiny instruments, clicking scanners, and colored vials of testing liquids. Reaching inside the kit, Yungar brought out a small white device, which he passed over Elrood. After tugging off the satin sleeping cap to reveal the sweaty scalp, Dr. Yungar scanned Elrood's skull, lifting the old man's head to check all around. Looking small and weak and old, the Emperor grumbled at the discomfort. Shaddam wondered what he himself would look like after 150 years, preferably at the end of a long and glorious reign. He fought back a smile and held his breath during the examination. Beside him, Fenring remained calm and aloof. Only the Chamberlain scowled. The doctor withdrew his scanner, then studied the imperial patient's case history cube. Presently he announced to the groggy old man, "Even melange can't keep you young forever, sire. At your age, health naturally begins to decline, sometimes rapidly." Inaudibly, Shaddam released a sigh of relief. With great difficulty, Elrood sat up, and his concubines propped tasseled pillows behind him. His cadaverous parchment face creased in a deep frown. "But only a few months ago I felt so much better." Aging is not a perfect downhill graph. There are peaks and valleys, recoveries and slowdowns. The doctor had the audacity to use a know-it-all tone that implied the Emperor could not understand such complex concepts. "The human body is a chemical and bioelectric soup, and changes are often triggered by seemingly inconsequential events. You have been under stress lately." "I'm the Emperor," Elrood snapped. this time responding as if the souk were unbearably stupid. "I have many responsibilities. Of course this causes stress." "Then start to delegate more to the Crown Prince and to your trusted aides, such as Fenring over there. You're not going to live forever, you know. Not even an emperor can do that. Plan for the future." Smugly the doctor snapped shut his case. Shaddam wanted to embrace him. "I will leave you with a prescription and devices to make you feel better." "The only prescription I want is more spice in my beer." Elrood took a deep drink from his mug, slurping loudly. "As you wish," the scrawny souk doctor said. From the suspensor pod he removed a satchel, which he placed on a side table. "These are muscle-soothing devices in case you need them. Instructions are contained with each unit. Have your concubines use them on your aches." All right, Elrood said. "Now leave me. I have work to do." Dr. Youngar backed down the steps from the bed platform with a bow. "With your permission, sire?" Impatiently the Emperor waved a gnarled hand in dismissal. The concubines moved about, whispering to each other, watching with wide eyes. Two of them picked up muscle-soothing devices and toyed with the controls. Shaddam whispered to one of the attendants to have the doctor go with Chamberlain Hesban, who would arrange for the transfer of payment. Hesban obviously wanted to stay in the bedchamber and discuss certain documents, treaties, and other state matters with the sick old man. But Shaddam, feeling he could take care of such things himself, wanted the dour adviser out of the way. When the souk was gone, old Elrood said to his son, "Perhaps the doctor is right, Shaddam. There is a matter I wish to discuss with you and Hasimir. A policy and project I wish to continue, regardless of my personal health. Have I told you about our plans on Ix and the eventual Tleilaxu takeover?" Shaddam rolled his eyes. "Of course, you old fool. Fenring and I have already done most of the work. It was our idea to send Tleilaxu face dancers to Ix, because they could disguise themselves and infiltrate the working classes." "Yes, Father. We know of the plans." Elrood waved a hand to beckon them closer, and the old man's features darkened. Out of the corner of his eye, Shaddam saw Fenring chase the hovering concubines away, then approach to hear the Emperor's words. "This morning I received a cipher from our operatives on Ix. You know about the enmity between myself and Earl Dominic Vernius?" "Ah, yes, we do, Father," Shaddam said. He cleared his throat. "An old affront. A stolen woman." Elrood's rheumy eyes brightened. "It seems that our brash Dominic has been playing with fire, training his men with mobile fighting mechs that scan opponents and process data, probably through a computer brain. He has also been selling these intelligent machines on the black market." "Sacrilege, sire," Fenring murmured. "That clearly goes against the strictures of the Great Convention." "Quite so," Elrood agreed. "And this isn't the only infraction. House Vernius has been developing sophisticated cyborg enhancements as well. Mechanical body replacements. We can use that to our advantage." Shaddam frowned, leaning closer and smelling the sour spice beer on the old man's breath. "Cyborgs? But they are human minds attached to robot bodies, and therefore not in violation of the jihad." Elrood smiled. "But we understand there have been certain compromises. True or not, it's exactly the sort of excuse our impostors need to finish the job. The time to act is now. House Vernius is poised on the brink of destruction, and a small nudge will topple them." "That is interesting," Fenring said. Then the Tleilaxu can take over the sophisticated Ixian facilities for their research. This is very important, and you will watch how I handle this situation, Elrood said with a sniff. Watch and learn. Already I have set my plan in motion. Ixian suboid workers are, shall we say, troubled by these developments. And we are— The Emperor paused to finish his mug of spice beer with a smack of his lips— encouraging their discontent through our own representatives. Setting down the empty mug, Elrood grew suddenly lethargic. He adjusted his pillows, shifted onto his back, and fell into a fitful sleep. Exchanging a knowing glance with Fenring, Shaddam thought of the conspiracy within the conspiracy, their own secret participation in the events on Ix, and how he and Fenring had put the Tleilaxu master in contact with Elrood in the first place. Now the Bene Tleilax, employing their own genetically altered shapeshifters, were stirring up religious fervor and discontent among Ix's lower classes. To the fanatical Tleilaxu, any hint of a thinking machine, and the Ixians who created them, was the work of Satan. As the two young men left the Emperor's chamber, Fenring smiled with similar thoughts. Watch and learn, the old fool had said. Elrood, you condescending bastard, you have much to learn yourself, and no time left in which to learn it. The leaders of the Butlerian Jihad did not adequately define artificial intelligence, failing to foresee all possibilities of an imaginative society. Therefore, we have substantial gray areas in which to maneuver. Confidential Ixian legal opinion. Though the explosion was distant, the concussion rocked the table where Leto and Romber sat studying sample resource ledgers. Small chunks of decorative plascrete trickled from the ceiling above them, where a long crack had just appeared. A jagged lightning bolt zigzagged across one of the broad Plaz observation windows, fracturing it. "Vermilion hells, what was that?" Romber said. Leto had already surged to his feet, knocking the ledgers aside and looking for the source of the explosion. He saw the far side of the underground grotto, where several badly damaged buildings crumbled into rubble. The two young men exchanged blank looks. "Get ready," Leto said, instantly on guard. Ready for what?" Leto didn't know. They had gone together into one of the tutorial rooms of the Grand Palais, first studying calculus philosophy and the underpinnings of the Holtzman effect, and then Ixian manufacturing and distribution systems. On the walls around them, ancient paintings hung in hermetically sealed frames, including works of the old Terran masters Claude Monet and Paul Gauguin, with interactive plates that allowed enhancements by Ixian depth artists. Since Leto had reported his adventure down in the suboid tunnels, he had heard of no further discussions or investigations. Perhaps the Earl hoped the problem would just go away. Another concussion rocked the room, this one closer, stronger. The Prince of Ix gripped the table to keep it from toppling. Leto rushed over to the cracked window. "Romber, look out here!" From the crosswalk streets connecting the stalactite buildings, someone screamed. Off to the left, an out-of-control transport capsule plummeted to smash into the ground far below with a spray of crystal shards and mutilated passengers. The door to the tutorial room crashed open. Captain Jaz of the Palace Guard burst in, carrying one of the new pulsed assault laser guns. 4 subordinates followed him, all armed in the same fashion, all wearing the silver and white uniforms of House Vernius. No one on Ix, especially not the Earl himself, had ever thought Leto or Romber would need the protection of personal bodyguards. "Come with us, young masters," Jaz said, breathing hard. The man's dark eyes, framed by his squarish brown beard, darted with excitement as he noted the stone fragments falling from the ceiling, then the cracked window plaze. Though he was ready to fight to the death, Jas clearly didn't understand what had taken place in the normally peaceful city of Vernii. "What's happening, Captain?" Romber asked, as the retinue of guards hustled them out of the room and into the corridor, where the lights flickered. His voice quavered for a moment, then sounded stronger, like an earl's heir should. "Tell me, is my family safe?" Other guards and members of the Ixian court ran helter-skelter, with excited shouts ringing out, high-pitched and strident, in counterpoint to yet another explosion. From far below came the hubbub of an angry mob, so distant it sounded like a deep murmur. Then Leto made out the buzzing hum of lasgun fire. Even before the captain answered Romber, Leto guessed the source of the disturbance. "There's trouble with the suboids, my lords," Jas shouted. "Don't worry, though, we'll have it under control soon." He touched a button on his belt, and a previously unseen door opened in the marble-mirrored wall. The captain and the household guard had drilled and prepared for so long against large-scale external attacks, they didn't seem to know how to deal with a revolt from within. "This way to safety. I'm sure your family will be there waiting for you." When the two young men ducked under the low half-door behind the mirrors, the portal sealed shut behind them. In the yellow light of emergency glow-globes, Leto and Romber ran alongside an electromagnetic track, while the captain of the guard shouted frantically into a tiny handheld commceiver. Lavender light flashed from the face of the instrument, and Leto heard the metallic sound of a responding voice. "Help is on the way." Seconds later, an armored personnel car roared along the sheltered track and screeched to a stop. Jas boarded with the two young heirs and a pair of guards, leaving the rest of the security men behind to defend their exit. Leto tumbled into a bucket seat, while Jas and Romber clambered into the front. The rail car began to move. "Suboids blew 2 of the diamond columns," Jas said, breathlessly consulting the lavender screen of his commceiver. "Part of the overhead crust has collapsed." His face turned gray with disbelief, and he scratched his brown beard. "This is impossible." Leto, who had seen the signs of the gathering storm all along, knew that the situation was probably even worse than the guard captain imagined. Ix's troubles would not be solved within an hour. A metallic-voiced report clattered in, sounding desperate. "Suboids are boiling up from the lower levels. How could they become so organized?" Romber cursed, and Leto looked knowingly at his stocky friend. He had tried to warn the Ixians, but he did not point out the fact. House Vernius had not been willing to consider the seriousness of the situation. In the rail car, a safety harness snapped into place over Leto as soon as he situated himself, and the car continued to accelerate with a smooth hum, traveling at high speed upward into caverns hidden in the rock ceiling. Captain Jas worked a comm-board at the front of the compartment, his fingers dancing over the communication keys. A blue glow surrounded his hands. At his side, Romber watched the guard captain intently, as if knowing he might be expected to take charge. "We're in an escape pod," one of the secondary guards explained to Leto. "You two are safe for now. The suboids won't be able to penetrate our upper defenses once we have them activated." "But what about my parents?" Romber asked. "And Kylea?" "We've got a plan for this, an option. You and your family should all meet at a rendezvous point. By all the saints and sinners, I hope my people remember what to do. For the first time, it isn't a drill." The car made several track changes, clicking and humming along with increased speed, and then ascended steeply into darkness. Presently the track leveled off, and the vehicle was bathed in light as it sped past an immense window wall of one-way armor plaze. They caught just a glimpse of the riots down below, flares of spontaneous fires and swirling demonstrations going on beneath the city. Another explosion, and one of the transport upper walkway tubes shattered, tumbling in shards to the floor of the cavern far below. Tiny, puppet-like figures of pedestrians flailed and fell to their doom. "Stop here, Captain," Romber cried. "I need to see what's happening out there." "Please, sir, keep it to a few seconds," the captain said. "The rebels could breach that wall." Leto found it hard to comprehend what he was hearing. Rebels? Explosions? Emergency evacuations? Ix had seemed so sophisticated, so peaceful, so protected from discord. Even dissatisfied with their lot, how could the suboids have orchestrated such a massive and coordinated assault? Where could they have gotten the resources? Through the one-way panel, Leto saw uniformed Vernius soldiers fighting a losing battle against swarms of the pale, smooth-skinned opponents down on the grotto floor. The suboids hurled crudely made explosive or incendiary devices, while Ixians cut the mobs down with purple beams of lasgun fire. "Command says the suboids are rebelling on all levels," Jaz said in a tone of disbelief. "They're screaming jihad as they attack." "Vermilion hells," Romber said. "What does the jihad have to do with anything? What could it have to do with us?" "We need to leave the window, sir," Jaz insisted, tugging at Romber's sleeve. "We have to make it to the rendezvous point." Romber lurched back from the window as part of a tiled street collapsed behind it, and wave upon wave of the pale suboids scrambled out of the dark tunnels beneath. The rail car picked up speed along the track and curved left into darkness, then ascended again. Romber nodded to himself, his face pinched and distressed. "We've got secret command centers on the upper levels. Precautions have been taken for this sort of thing, and by now our military units will have surrounded the most vital manufacturing facilities. It shouldn't take long to subdue this." The Earl's son sounded as if he were trying to convince himself. At the front of the car, Jaz leaned intently over the comm-board, which cast his face in pale light. "Look out! Trouble ahead, sir!" He wrenched the controls. The rail car rocked, and Jaz took a side track. The other two guards brought their weapons to bear, squinting into the rocky darkness all around them, ready to fire. "Unit 4 has been overrun," Captain Jaz said. "Suboids broke through the sidewalls. I'm trying for 3 instead." "Overrun?" Romber said, and his face flushed with either embarrassment or fear. "How in the hells could the suboids do that?" "Command says Tleilaxu are involved, and some of their face dancers. They're all heavily armed." He gasped as he stared at the reports flowing in. "May God protect us." Questions fell in an avalanche around Leto. Tleilaxu? Why would they attack Ix? Jihad? This is a machine planet, and the Tleilaxu are religious fanatics. Do they fear Ixian machines enough to use their tank-grown shape-shifters to infiltrate the suboid workforce? That would explain the coordination. But why would they be so interested? Why here? As the rail car soared along, Jaz scrutinized the comm-board, where he received battle reports. "By all the saints and sinners, Tleilaxu engineers have just blown the pipelines that feed heat from the molten core of the planet." "But we need that energy to run the factories," Romber cried, still hanging on to his seat. "They've also destroyed recycling lines where the industrial waste and exhaust chemicals are dumped into the mantle." Now the captain's voice sounded more ragged. "They're hitting at the heart of Ix, paralyzing our manufacturing capacity." As Leto thought back on what he had learned during his months on this planet, pieces of the puzzle began fitting together in his mind. "Think about it," he said. "All of that can be fixed. They knew exactly where to hit in order to cripple Ix without causing permanent damage." Leto gave a grim nod, the reason suddenly clear to him. The Tleilaxu want this world and its facilities intact. They plan to take over here. "Don't be ridiculous, Leto. We'd never give Ix to the filthy Tleilaxu." Romber looked perplexed more than miffed. "We may not have any choice in the matter, sir," Jaz said. At Romber's barked command for weapons, One of the guards opened a cabinet beneath the rail car and brought out a pair of flechette pistols and shield belts, which he handed to both princes. Without questioning, Leto snapped on the belt, touched a test button to confirm that the unit was operational. The projectile weapon felt cold in his hand. He checked its clip of deadly darts, accepted 2 additional packs from the guard, and slid them into compartments on the shield belt. The escape pod thundered into a long, dark tunnel. Ahead Leto saw light, which grew larger and brighter by the second. He remembered what his father had said to him about the Tleilaxu. They destroy anything that resembles a thinking machine. Ix would have been a natural target for them. The light ahead touched them now, dazzling his eyes, and they roared into it. Religion and law among the masses must be one and the same. An act of disobedience must be a sin and require religious penalties. This will have the dual benefit of bringing both greater obedience and greater bravery. We must depend not so much on the bravery of individuals, you see, as upon the bravery of a whole population. Pardot Kynes, addressed to gathered representatives of the greater Sietches. Oblivious to the fate that had been decided for him, Pardot Kynes strolled through the tunnels, accompanied by his now faithful companions Amun and Turok. The 3 went to visit Stilgar, who rested and healed in his family chambers. At first sight of his visitor, Aline Stilgar sat forward on his sickbed. Though his wound should have been fatal, the Freeman youth had almost entirely recovered in a short time. "I owe you the water of my life, planetologist," he said, and with great seriousness spat upon the floor of the cave. Kynes was startled for a moment, then thought he understood. He knew the importance of water to these people, especially the precious moisture contained within a person's body. For Stilgar to sacrifice even a droplet of saliva showed him a great honor. "I appreciate your water, Stilgar," Kynes said with a forced smile. "But you may keep the rest of it for now. I want you to be well." Freeth, Stilgar's quiet sister, stayed by the young man's bedside, always busy, her blue eyes darting from side to side in search of something else to do. She looked long at Kynes, as if assessing him, but her expression was unreadable. Then she silently glided off to bring more unguents that would speed her brother's healing. Later, as Kynes walked along the Sietch passageways, curious people gathered to follow him and listen. In the midst of their daily routines, this tall, stubble-bearded planetologist continued to be something new and interesting. His crazy but visionary words might sound ridiculous, the most preposterous of fantasies, but even the Sietch's children tagged along after the stranger. The bemused and talkative crowd accompanied Kynes as he lectured, gesturing with his hands, gazing at the ceiling as if he could see the open sky there. Though they tried, these freemen could not imagine the sight of clouds gathering to pour rain upon the desert. Droplets of moisture falling from the empty sky? Absurd! Some of the children laughed at the very idea of rain on Dune, but Kynes kept talking, explaining the steps of his process to reap the faintest breath of water vapor from the air. He would collect every sparkle of dew in the shadows to help twist Arrakis in the way he required, to pave the way for a brilliant new ecology. "You must think of this world in engineering terms," Kynes said, in a professorial tone. He was happy to have such an attentive audience, though he wasn't sure how much they understood. This planet, taken in its entirety, is merely an expression of energy, a machine driven by its sun. He lowered his voice and looked down at a young, wide-eyed girl. "What it requires is reshaping to fit our needs. We have the ability to do that on Dune. But do we have the self-discipline and the drive? He lifted his gaze to someone else. That is up to us. He lifted his gaze to someone else. That is up to us. By now Amun and Turok had heard most of Kynes's lectures. Although they had scoffed at first, eventually the words had sunk in. Now, the more they heard of his unbridled enthusiasm and bright honesty, the more they actually began to believe. Why not dream? Judging from the expressions on the faces of his listeners, they could see that other freemen had started to consider the possibilities as well. The Sietch elders called these converts optimistic and overly gullible. Undaunted, Kynes continued to spread his ideas, as outrageous as they might seem. Wearing a grim expression, Naib Hanar squinted his one eye and extended the holy crysknife, still sheathed. The strong warrior, standing rigid in front of him, held out his hands to receive the gift. The Naib intoned ritual words. Ulit, Older Leet, you have been chosen for this task for the good of our Sietch. You have proven yourself many times in battle against the Harkonnens. You are an accomplished worm rider, and one of the greatest fighters among the freemen. A man of middle years and craggy features, Ulit bowed. His hands remained outstretched. He waited and did not flinch. Though a deeply religious man, he held his awe in check. Take this consecrated crysknife, Ulit. Hanar now grasped the carved hilt and yanked the long, milky, white blade from its sheath. The crysknife was a sacred relic among the freemen, fashioned from the crystal tooth of a sandworm. This particular blade was fixed, keyed to the body of its owner, so that the weapon would dissolve upon his death. Your blade has been dipped in the poisonous water of life, and blessed by Shai-Hulud, Hanar continued. As is our tradition, the sacred blade must not be sheathed again until it has tasted blood. Ulit took the weapon, suddenly overwhelmed by the importance of the task for which he had been selected. Intensely superstitious, he had watched the great worms in the desert, and had ridden atop them many times. But never had he allowed himself to become familiar with the magnificent creatures. He could not forget that they were the manifestations of the great Creator of the universe. I shall not fail the will of Shai-Hulud. Ulit accepted the blade and held it high, with its poisoned tip pointed away from him. The other elders stood behind the one-eyed Naib, firm in their decision. Take 2 watermen with you, Hanar said, to collect the water of this planetologist and use it for the good of our Sietch. Perhaps we should take a small amount and plant a bush in his honor, said Aliyid. But no one seconded the suggestion. Out of the stone-walled chamber, Ulit walked tall and proud, a warrior of the freemen. He did not fear this planetologist, though the outsider spoke fervently of his wild and preposterous plans, as if he were guided by a holy vision. A shudder went up the assassin's spine. Ulit narrowed his deep blue eyes and forced such thoughts from his mind as he strode down the shadowed passageways. 2 watermen followed him, bearing empty liter-johns for collecting Kynes's blood, and absorbent cloths to soak up every drop that might spill on the stone floor. The planetologist was not difficult to find. An entourage trailed him, their faces filled with either awe or skepticism tinged with wonder. Towering over the others, Kynes walked an aimless path, lecturing as he went, waving his arms. His flock scuttled after him at a wary distance, sometimes asking questions, but more often just listening. The human question is not how many can survive within the system, Kynes was saying as Ulit approached, the crysknife plain in his hand, his mission clear on his face. But what kind of existence is possible for those who do survive? Moving forward, unwavering, Ulit stepped through the fringes of the crowd. The planetologist's listeners saw the assassin and his knife. They stepped away and looked at each other knowingly, some with disappointment, some with fear. They fell silent. This was the way of the Freeman people. Kynes didn't notice at all. With one finger he made a circle in the air. Open water is possible here, with a slight but viable change. We can do this if you help me. Think of it. Walking in the open without a still suit. He pointed at two of the children closest to him. They backed away shyly. Just imagine. So much moisture in the air that you no longer need to wear still suits. You mean we could even have water in a pond that we might dip out and drink any time we wish? One of the skeptical observers said, his voice sarcastic. Certainly. I've seen it on many worlds, and there's no reason we can't do it on Dune too. With wind traps, you can grab the water from the air and use it to plant grasses, shrubs, anything that will lock the water in cells and root systems and keep it there. In fact, beside those open ponds, one could even have orchards with sweet, juicy fruit for the picking. Ulit stepped forward in a trance of determination. The accompanying watermen behind him held back. They would not be needed until after the killing was finished. "What kind of fruit?" a girl asked. "Oh, any kind you like," Kynes said. "We'd have to pay attention to soil conditions and moisture first. Grapes, perhaps, on the rocky slopes. I wonder what an Arrakis vintage wine would taste like." He smiled. "And round orange fruits. Portugals. Ah, I like those. My parents used to have a tree on Seleucus Secundus. Portugals have a hard, leathery rind, but you peel it away. Inside the fruit is in sections, sweet and juicy, and the brightest color of orange you could ever imagine." Ulit saw only a red haze. His assignment burned in his brain, obscuring all else from his vision. Naib Hainar's orders echoed in his skull. He walked into the empty area where the people had drawn back to listen to the planetologist's rantings. Ulit tried not to hear the dreams, tried not to think of the visions Kynes summoned. Clearly this man was a demon, sent to warp the minds of his listeners. Ulit stared fixedly ahead, while Kynes continued to wander down the corridor, taking no notice. With broad gestures he described grasslands, canals, and forests. He painted pictures in their imaginations. The planetologist licked his lips, as if he could already taste the wine from Dune. Ulit stepped in front of him and raised the poisoned crysknife. In the middle of a sentence, Kynes suddenly noticed the stranger. As if annoyed at the distraction, he blinked once and simply said, "Remove yourself," as he brushed past Ulit and continued to talk. Ah, forests, green and lush as far as the eye can see, covering hills and swales and broad valleys. In ancient times, sand encroached on plants and destroyed them. But it will be the reverse on the new Dune. The wind will carry seeds across the planet, and more trees and other plants will grow like children. The assassin stood still, astonished at being so casually dismissed. "Remove yourself." The import of what he had been charged to do transfixed him. If he killed this man, Freeman legends would call Ulit the destroyer of dreams. "First, though, we must install wind traps in the rocks," Kynes continued, breathless. "They're simple systems, easy to construct, and will grasp moisture, funneling it to where we can use it. Eventually, we'll have vast underground catch basins for all the water, a step toward bringing water back to the surface. Yes, I said back. Once water ran freely on Dune. I have seen signs of it." In dismay, Ulit stared at the poisoned knife, unable to believe that this man had no fear of him whatsoever. "Remove yourself." Kynes had faced his death and walked right past it, guided by God. Ulit stood there now, knife in hand, the unprotected shoulders of the imperial servant taunting him. He could easily drive a killing blow into the man's spine. But the assassin could not move. He saw the planetologist's confidence, as if he were protected by some holy guardian. The vision this great man brought for the future of Dune had already captivated these people, and the freemen, with their harsh lives and generations of enemies who had forced them from planet to planet, needed a dream. Perhaps someone had finally been sent to guide them. A prophet. Ulit's soul would be damned forever if he dared to kill the long-awaited messenger sent by God. But he had accepted a mission from his Sietch leader, and knew that the crysknife could never be put away without shedding blood. In this case, the dilemma could not be resolved by a minor cut either, for the blade was poisoned. The merest scratch would kill. Those facts could not be reconciled with each other. Ulit's hands trembled on the hilt of the curved knife. Without noticing that everyone had fallen silent around him, Kynes rambled on about wind-trap placement, but his audience, knowing what must happen, watched their esteemed warrior. Then Ulit's mouth watered. He tried not to think of it, but, as if in a dream, he seemed to taste the sweet, sticky juice of portugals, fresh fruit that one could simply pluck from a tree and eat, a mouthful of lush pulp washed down with pure water from an open pond, water for everyone. Ulit took a step back, and another, holding the knife up in a ceremonial gesture. He took a third step away, as Kynes spoke of wheat and rye-covered plains, and gentle rain showers in the spring. The assassin turned, dizzy, thinking of the 2 words the messenger had said to him, "Remove yourself." He turned away and stared down at the knife he held in front of him. Then Ulit swayed, stopped, then swayed forward again deliberately, and fell on his knife. His knees did not bend, nor did he flinch or try to avoid his fate, as he let himself fall face first onto the floor, onto the tip of the blade. The poisoned crysknife plunged below his sternum and up into his heart. Sprawled on the stone floor, his body trembled. Within moments, Ulit was dead. There was very little blood. The Sietch audience cried out at the omen they had just witnessed, and backed away. Now, as the freeman gazed at Kynes with religious awe, his words finally stuttered to a halt. He turned and saw the sacrifice this freeman had just made for him, the bloodletting. "What's going on here?" Kynes demanded. "Who was that man?" The watermen rushed forward to remove Ulit's body. With a rustle of robes, a shrouding of blankets and towels and cloths, they whisked away the fallen assassin, taking him to the death stills for processing. The other freeman now stared at Kynes with reverence. "Look! God has shown us what to do, one woman exclaimed. He has guided Ulit. He has spoken to Pardot Kynes. Oma Kynes, someone said. Prophet Kynes. One man stood up and glared at the others gathered around. We would be fools not to listen to him now. Runners departed and dashed through the siege. Not understanding the Freeman religion, Kynes couldn't grasp it all. From that point on, however, he didn't think he would have trouble getting anyone to listen to him. No outsider has ever seen a Tleilaxu female and lived to tell about it. Considering the Tleilaxu penchant for genetic manipulation, c.e.g., related memos on clones and golas, this simple observation raises a wealth of additional questions. Bene Gesserit analysis. A breathless Ixian woman with full courier credentials arrived on Kytane, bearing an important communique for the Emperor. She marched into the palace without pause, stopping to answer no questions. Even Kamar Pilru, the official ambassador from Ix, had not yet heard the message or the dire news of the underground suboid revolt. Since instantaneous fold-space communication did not exist between planets, certified and bonded couriers booked passage on express highliners, bearing flash-memorized communications for personal delivery to the intended recipients. The net result was much faster than radio or other electronic signals that would take years to cross vast space. Under the escort of 2 guildsmen, Courier Yuta Bray arranged for an immediate appointment with the Emperor. The woman staunchly refused to reveal anything to her planet's own ambassador, who got wind of the excitement and rushed into the audience chamber. The magnificent golden lion throne sat empty. Elrood was again feeling tired and ill. This is for the Emperor's ears only, an urgent private request from Earl Dominic Vernius, Bray said to Ambassador Pilru, turning hard eyes toward him. The Guild and Choam used various harsh techniques to indoctrinate official couriers, ensuring accuracy and loyalty. However, please remain at hand, Ambassador. I also bear vital news regarding the possible downfall of Ix. You must be apprised of the situation. Gasping, Ambassador Pilru beseeched the courier for more information, but the woman remained silent. Leaving her guild escorts and the Ixian diplomat behind in the audience chamber, Sardaukar elite guards examined her credentials and ushered her alone into an anteroom adjacent to Elrood's bedchamber. The Emperor, looking aged and drawn, wore a robe bearing the imperial crest on its lapel. He sat slumped in a high-backed chair, with his feet on a heated ottoman. Beside him stood a tall, fussy-looking man with drooping mustaches, Chamberlain Aiken Hesban. It surprised Bray to see the old man seated in this rather ordinary fashion instead of on the massive throne. His blue-tinted eyes were filled with sickness, and he could hardly hold his head erect on its rail-thin, wattled neck. Elrood seemed ready to pass out at any moment. With a curt bow, she announced, "I am Courier Yuta Bray from Ix, sire, with an important request from Lord Dominic Vernius." The Emperor scowled upon hearing his old rival's name, but said nothing, waiting and ready to pounce. He coughed, hawking something onto a lacy handkerchief. "I am listening." "It is for the Emperor's ears only," she said, staring insolently at Hesban. "Well," Elrood said, with a terse smile, "I don't hear so well any more, and this distinguished gentleman is my ears. Or should I say, are my ears? Does one use the plural in a situation like this?" The Chamberlain bent over to whisper something to him. "I am informed that he is my ears, Elrood said with a decisive nod. "As you wish," Bray said. She recited the memorized words, using even the intonations Dominic Vernius had used. "We are under attack from the Bene Tleilax under a false guise of internal unrest. Through infiltration by face-dancer mimics, the Tleilaxu have fomented an insurrection among our working class. By these treacherous means, the rebels have gained the advantage of surprise. Many of our defense installations have either been destroyed or are besieged. Like madmen they scream, 'Jihad! Jihad!'" "Holy war?" Esben said. "Over what? What has Ix done now?" "We have no idea, Monsieur Chamberlain. The Tleilaxu are known to be religious fanatics. Our suboids are bred to follow instructions and thus are easily manipulated." Yuta Bray hesitated, with a slight trembling of her lips. "Earl Dominic Vernius respectfully requests the immediate intervention of the Emperor Sardaukar against this illegal act." She recited extensive details on Ixian and Tleilaxu military positions, including the extent of the uprising, the manufacturing facilities crippled, and the citizens murdered. Prominent among the victims was the ambassador's own wife, a guild banker, who had died in an explosion at the guild embassy building. "They've gone too far." Indignant, Esben appeared ready to issue the order himself for the defense of Ix. The request of House Vernius was eminently reasonable. Looking down at the Emperor, he said, "Sire, if the Tleilaxu wish to accuse Ix of violating any strictures of the Great Convention, let them do so in open Landsraad Court." Although incense burned in the air, and spicy hors d'oeuvres sat arrayed on mother-of-pearl serving trays, Bray could still smell a sour odor of sickness hanging in the stuffy air of the anteroom. Elrood fidgeted under the weight of his heavy robe. He narrowed his rheumy eyes. "We will take your request under advisement, courier. I feel as if I need to rest a bit now. Doctor's orders, you know. We will discuss the matter tomorrow. Please take refreshment and select a chamber in our visiting dignitaries' quarters. You may also wish to meet with the Ixian ambassador." A look of alarm electrified the woman's gaze. "This information is already several hours old, sire. We are in a most desperate situation. I have been instructed to tell you that Earl Vernius believes any delay will be fatal." Esben responded loudly, still confused as to why Elrood would not take immediate action. "One does not tell the Emperor anything, young lady. One makes requests of him, no more." "My deepest apologies, sire. Please forgive my agitation, but today I have seen my world struck a deadly blow. What response may I give to Earl Vernius?" "Be patient. I will get back to him in due time after I have considered my reply." All color drained from Bray's face. "May I ask when?" "You may not," Elrood thundered. "Your audience is concluded." He glared back at her. Taking charge, Chamberlain Esben stepped forward, placing a hand on Bray's shoulder and steering her toward the door as he looked curiously over his shoulder at the Emperor. "As you wish, sire." Bray bowed, and the elite guards escorted her from the room. Elrood had not failed to notice anger and despair in the courier's expression when she realized that her mission had failed. He had seen desperation and the beginnings of tears in her eyes. So tiresome, so predictable. But everything had proceeded perfectly. As soon as the Ixian courier and the court chamberlain were gone, Crown Prince Shaddam and Fenring entered the anteroom and stood before Elrood. The old man knew they had been eavesdropping. "Quite an education you two are getting, eh?" Elrood said. "Watch and learn." "Ah, yes. You handled the situation masterfully, Father. Events are unfolding exactly as you predicted." with a great deal of invisible help from me and Fenring." The Emperor beamed, then fell into a bout of coughing. "My Sardaukar would have been more efficient than Tleilaxu, but I couldn't risk showing my hand too early. A formal Ixian complaint to the Landsraad could spell trouble. We've got to get rid of House Vernius and put the Tleilaxu in place as our puppets, with legions of Sardaukar sent in afterward to crack down and ensure the takeover." Perhaps it would be preferable to refer to it as fostering a smooth and orderly transition. Avoid using the term crack down. Elrood smiled with his papery lips, exposing teeth in a way that made his head look even more like a skull. "See, Hasamir, you are learning to be a politician after all, despite your rather direct methods." Though all three of them knew the underlying reasons for the overthrow of Ix, none of them spoke of the benefits they would receive after Hidar Fen Najidica had begun the artificial spice research there. Chamberlain Hesban burst back into the room, uncharacteristically flustered. He bowed. "Sire, pardon me, please. As I was transferring the courier back to her guild escorts, she informed them that you had refused to act in accordance with imperial regulations. She has already joined with Ambassador Pilru in requesting an immediate audience with the members of the Landsraad Council." She's going behind your back, sire," Fenring said. "Absurd," the old Emperor snapped, then searched for his ever-present mug of spice beer. "What does a messenger know of imperial regulations?" "Though they have not qualified for full mentat training, licensed couriers have perfect memory, sire," Fenring pointed out, bending close to the Emperor in the position Chamberlain Hesban usually assumed. "She can't process the concepts, but she may well have every regulation and codicil readily accessible in her brain. She rattled off a number of them in my presence." "Ah, yes, but how can she contest the Emperor's decision, when he hasn't even made up his mind yet?" Shaddam asked. Hesban tugged on one of his drooping mustaches, increasing the frown that he directed at the Crown Prince, but he refrained from scolding Shaddam for his ignorance of imperial law. By mutual agreement between the Federated Council of the Landsraad and House Carino, the Emperor is required either to render immediate assistance or convene an emergency Security Council meeting to deal with the matter. If your father does not act within the hour, the Ixian ambassador is within his rights to convene the council himself." "Security Council?" Elrood grimaced and looked first to Chamberlain Hesban, then to Fenring for assistance. "What regulation is that infernal woman citing?" "Volume 30, Section 6.3, under the Great Convention." "What does it say?" Hesban took a deep breath. "It concerns situations of house-to-house warfare, in which an appeal to the Emperor has been made by one of the parties engaged in hostilities. The regulation was designed to prohibit emperors from taking sides. In such matters you must act as a neutral arbiter." "Neutral, yes, but you must act." He shuffled his feet. "Sire, I'm afraid I don't understand why you would wish to delay. Surely you don't side with the Tleilaxu?" "There are many things you don't understand, Akin," the Emperor said. "Just follow my wishes." The Chamberlain appeared stung. Fenring paced behind the high-backed chair, then snagged a crystallized fruit wafer off one of the snacking trays. "Technically, the courier is correct, sire. You're not allowed to delay for a day or two. The regulation also goes on to say that, if called, the Landsraad Security Council meeting cannot be concluded without a decision." Fenring placed a finger on his lips as he considered. "The hostile parties and their representatives have a right to attend. In the Ixians' case, their representative could be the Spacing Guild as well as Ambassador Pilru, who, I might add, has a son currently threatened by the revolt on Ix, and another son recently inducted into the guild. Remember, too, the ambassador's wife has been killed in the revolt, has been added. People are dying. Considering our plans for the Tleilaxu to use Ixian facilities, it would be better to keep the guild out of this, too, Shaddam spoke up. Plans? The chamberlain looked alarmed to learn he had been kept out of such important discussions. He turned to Elrood. What plans, sire? Later, Akin. The Emperor frowned. Shifting uncomfortably on his chair, he tugged the robes around his sunken chest. Damn that woman! The guildsmen are waiting with her down the hall, has been pressed. Ambassador Pilru demands an audience with you. In only a few moments other houses will get wind of the news, and they'll insist on action as well, especially the ones with Choam directorships. Turmoil on Ix will have drastic economic consequences, at least for the immediate future. Bring me the regulations and 2 mentats to run independent analyses. Find something to get us out of this. The Emperor appeared suddenly alert, pumped up by the crisis. House Corino must not interfere with the Tleilaxu takeover of Ix. Our future depends on it. As you wish, sire. Hesben bowed and left in a rustle of his deep blue finery, still perplexed, but willing to follow orders. Minutes later a house servant entered the anteroom carrying a projector and a black Plaz oval screen. Bustling about, the servant set up the apparatus on a table. Fenring moved it into position so the Emperor could see it better. Hesben returned, flanked by 2 mentats, their lips stained red with sappho juice. Outside the door, the Sardaukar elite guard held back several representatives who clamored for entry. Clearly recognizable above the clamor was the high-pitched, agitated voice of the Ixian ambassador. Fenring called up recorded data on Shigawire reels as Chamberlain Hesben summarized the events and the problem for the 2 Imperial mentats. Images danced above the table. Black words printed in Galak. Staying close to his friend, Shaddam peered into the depths of the law, as if he might spot some subtlety that had eluded everyone else. Both mentats stood rigid, eyes distant, as they ran their separate analyses of the law and its subsidiary codes. To begin, one of the mentats said, take a look at 6.3. The words scrolled across the projector field in a blur, then stopped on a particular page. One of the sections was highlighted in red, and a second holocopy of the page appeared in midair. The duplicate floated to the Emperor's lap, so that both he and the others could read it. Won't work, the second mentat said. Cross-reference 78.3, Volume 12. Leaning close, Elrood scanned the regulation. Then he passed a hand through the page, and it disappeared. Rotten guild, he said. We'll bring them to their knees as soon as... Fenring cleared his throat to interrupt the failing Emperor's train of thought before he could reveal too much. The holoprojector began searching again as the mentats fell silent. Chamberlain Hesben leaned close to study pages that slowed in front of him. Blast those regulations! That's what I'd like to do, use atomics on all the laws. Elrood continued to fume. Do I rule the Imperium, or don't I? Having to pander to the Landsrat, having to avoid stepping on the guild's toes. An emperor shouldn't be required to bow to other powers. Quite right, sire, Hesben acknowledged. But we're caught in a web of treaties and alliances. Maybe this is something, Fenring said presently. Jihad Appendix 19.004. He paused. In matters involving the Butlerian Jihad and the strictures established thereafter, the Emperor is given additional latitude to make decisions regarding punishment for those who breach the prohibition against thinking machines. The Emperor's sunken eyes lit up. "Ah, and since there is some question here about possible Ixian violations, perhaps we can legally proceed with all due caution, especially since we have recently received disturbing reports about machine developments." "We have?" the Chamberlain asked. "Certainly. Remember the self-learning fighting mechs on the black market? That bears closer scrutiny." Shaddam and Fenring smiled at each other. They all knew such a stance might not hold up to prolonged scrutiny, but for now Elrood only needed to delay taking action. The Tleilaxu would seal their conquest in another day or two. Without outside support, House Vernius didn't have a chance. Hesben added, studying the precise Gallic words, "According to this appendix, the Padishah Emperor is the holy guardian of the jihad, charged with protecting it and all it represents." "Ah, yes. In that case, we could request to see this alleged evidence from the Tleilaxu ambassador, and then give Pilru a set time to respond afterward." Shaddam paused, looked at Fenring for encouragement. By the end of the day, the Emperor could issue a request for a temporary cessation of hostilities. "It'll be too late then," Chamberlain Hesben said. "Exactly. Ix will fall, and there will be nothing they can do about it." Like many culinary delicacies, revenge is a dish best savored slowly after long and delicate preparation. Emperor Elrood IX, Deathbed Insights. Half an hour later, Shaddam watched the opposing ambassadors enter the Emperor's anteroom for a private audience meant to resolve the matter. At Fenring's suggestion, he had changed into a more formal outfit with subtle military trappings, so that while his father looked unkempt and sloppy, he had the appearance of a leader. The Ixian ambassador had a broad, flesh-fat face with pink cheeks. His entire body looked rumpled in a serge single suit with wide lapels and fluffed collar. His thin gray hair had been combed hurriedly. Since he admitted he wasn't personally familiar with the crisis conditions on Ix, he brought along the courier Yuta Bray, an eyewitness. The only Tleilaxu delegate they could find, Mofra Tui, was a man of small stature with scruffy orange hair and grayish skin. The man exuded a barely suppressed rage, seething as his small dark eyes bored holes through his Ixian counterpart. Tui had been briefed in exactly what to say. Ambassador Pilru remained shocked by the entire situation, only now beginning to grasp the death of his wife Satina and mourn her. It all seemed unreal to him, a nightmare. He shifted uneasily on his feet, concerned for his world, his position, and his missing son Kater. The ambassador's gaze flitted around the room, looking for support among the Emperor's advisers and staff. It gave him a chill to see their hard gazes turned back at him. 2 guild agents hovered at the rear of the anteroom, looking on expressionlessly. One of them had a ruddy face with scars. The other's head was misshapen, bubbled out at the back. Shaddam had seen similar people before, people who had begun training as guild navigators, but had failed the rigors of the selection process. "We will hear from Mofra Tui first," the Emperor said in a rasping voice. "I would have him explain himself and his people's suspicions." "And why they are taking such unprecedented and violent action," Pilru interjected. The others ignored his outburst. "We have discovered illegal activities on Ix," the Tleilaxu began in a childlike voice. "The Bene Tleilax felt it imperative to stop this scourge before another insidious machine intelligence could be unleashed in the Imperium. If we had waited, the human race might have been subjected to more millennia of slavery. We had no choice but to act as we did." "Liar!" Pilru snarled. "What makes you the enforcers of the strictures without due process of law? You have no proof because there have been no illegal activities on Ix. We have adhered carefully to all guidelines from the Jihad." With remarkable calm for a Tleilaxu, Tui kept his gaze on the others in the room, as if Pilru were beneath contempt. "Our forces took necessary action before the evidence could be destroyed. Have we not learned from the Great Revolt? Once active, a machine intelligence may become vindictive, and it can develop the ability to copy itself and spread like wildfire. Ix is the source of all machine minds. We Tleilaxu are continuing the holy war only to keep the universe free of this enemy." Though Ambassador Pilru stood 2 heads taller than he, Tui screamed at him, "Jihad! Jihad!" "Now see here, sir," Pilru said, falling back several steps. "This behavior is uncalled for." "Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind," the Tleilaxu snapped. "You and House Vernius will be damned for your sins." "Calm yourself." Artfully suppressing a smile, Elrood motioned for Tui to return to his earlier position. Reluctantly, the diminutive delegate cooperated. Pilru and the Ixian courier conferred in low, anxious tones. Before the ambassador said, "I ask the Emperor to require proof of such violations. The Bene Tleilax have acted as a rogue element, destroying our commercial base without first submitting their accusations to the Landsraad." Then he added quickly, "Or to the Emperor." "Evidence is being compiled," Tui responded, "and it will include the true motive behind the criminal acts you Ixians have committed. Your profit margins have been slipping, putting your Choam membership in jeopardy." "Ah," Shaddam thought, exchanging glances with Hasamir Fenring. "Those reports that we falsified so skillfully." No one could manipulate documents as well as Fenring. "That's patently false," Pilru said. "We're more profitable than ever, especially with our new Highliner design. Simply ask the Guild. Your people had no right to incite such violence." "We had every right, the moral right, to protect the Imperium from another epoch of domination by machines. We see through your subterfuges to your motivation for making machine minds. Is your profit worth more than the safety of humanity? You have sold your souls." Veins throbbed at Pilru's temples, and he lost his ambassadorial calm. "You lying little bastard, this is a complete fabrication!" He turned to Elrood. "Sire, I demand that you send Sardaukar to Ix to intervene and protect our people from the illegal invasion committed by forces of the Bene Tleilax. We have broken no laws." "Violating the Butlerian Jihad is a most serious charge," the Emperor said in a thoughtful tone, though he didn't really care a whit about it. He covered his mouth as he coughed again. "Such an accusation cannot be taken lightly. Think of the consequences." Elrood spoke with deliberate slowness, which Shaddam found amusing. The Crown Prince couldn't help admiring some things about his doomed father, but Elrood was far beyond his prime, and it was time for new blood to step in. The courier spoke up. "Emperor Elrood, the Tleilaxu are stalling for time while battles rage on Ix. Use your Sardaukar to enforce a cessation of hostilities, then let each side present its case and evidence in court." The Emperor's eyes arched, and he gazed down his thin nose at her. "As a mere courier, you are not qualified to present arguments to me." He flicked his glance at the Sardaukar guards. "Remove this woman." Desperation gave her voice a ragged edge. "Pardon, sire, but I am the one most familiar with the crisis on Ix, and my Lord Vernius instructed me to take all necessary steps. We demand that the Bene Tleilax present proof immediately or withdraw their forces. They aren't compiling evidence. That's just a delaying tactic." "When can you submit the proof to me?" the Emperor inquired, sliding his gaze to Tui.